Now it's gonna be pay. So that's, to me, I don't know. I mean, I think you should really, I'm sure you've talked about it, but I'm not gonna change anything in my listing presentation for myself personally. I still have to sell. I'm gonna sit down and say, here's my commission, you know? This is what I charge, and we traditionally, throughout the years, we've split that, 50-50 with the buyer's agent. What do you think? And if they go, well, we understand what I'm saying. Well, not exactly. That's not how it works. So, I mean, I don't know what you guys are planning on doing, but that's kind of the way I'm gonna approach it. I'm gonna approach it just like it's status quo. We haven't changed anything. I haven't changed anything anyway. And the reason being is, I don't think the business is gonna change to you. If you're a buyer's agent, they're just making it harder is all they're doing. Right? Say yes, I mean, you can agree with me and not. I told this story before, but I used to teach English, and I made the mistake the first couple of years of teaching Beowulf. You ever heard of that? Old English? Right after lunch, bad. The wife of Bath, everybody liked her. Do you remember her? She was a prostitute with the gap in her teeth. Everybody liked that part. The rest of it, they didn't. But so this class will be similar to that to some degree because it's 1 o'clock, It's after a 4-day or 5-day, depending on who you are, weekend. So, but we'll talk some about those, and if you have any questions about any of those changes, we can talk about it together, because I don't know them any better than you do. I promise. All right? So for the agents who are new, if there's any here, semi-new, everybody's experienced. I always start the class with the same thing, honestly, even though it's a contract class. You have one job. You know what that is? It's lead generation. I mean, that's really what it is. The rest of it's easy. Hell, a contract's not a big deal at all. You got a bunch of blanks there. You ask the buyer, how much you want to pay? They say this, you write it down. When do you want to close? You write it down. We'll go through all that. The point is, you've got to generate leads, and everybody thinks they've got to have thousands of leads, and for a team, you might have to have dozens, I'm guessing. But really, I asked this question, how many leads do you really need? How many do you really need as an agent per week if you're going to be successful? One! One lead, that's all you need. Because if you had one lead a week, how many transactions is that? If they were good leads, solid leads, or whether you're a buyer or a seller, it's 52. You can't handle 52 transactions as a new agent, can you? Probably not. I mean, it's gonna be really hard. But really, you have to think about that and think, okay, I don't need 100 leads. What I need is one good lead. And I guarantee you, if you went over to National and stood on the corner by Cox South, right there with that sign, how everybody does the sign? But you just have business cards. Everybody that stops, try to give them a business card right there at the corner. I would bet you would generate one good lead a week. That wouldn't be much fun. All you'd have to do is
what would you
humiliate yourself.
You're a panhandler, but it's for real estate.
Yeah,
Try it.
I mean, exactly. But the point is, I want you to remember that. Because everybody thinks they need hundreds of thousands of leads. You really don't. You need one good lead. If you have one good buyer and one good seller a week, my God, that's 104. And you couldn't handle that either. So it's really just one. It's what you want, I know everybody thinks they need thousands, but that's really not the case. I mean, I just want you to remember that. And there's a lot of good ways to generate leads, and you can figure it out. I like the stand on the corner one. I'll tell you what I did when I first got started. I lived in Branson, and there was a grocery store. I can't remember the name of it now. Like a Hearts or something like that. Anyway, I knew the guy pretty well. So I wouldn't have much, I wouldn't have as much success as I want. Everybody wants more success. So I went to the grocery store, and you know how on the bottom, it's raised up a little bit. So I put a card on the corner of every shelf all the way through the store. On the bottom, because they didn't normally sweep that well. So my cards would stay there for 3 or 4 days. And finally, the owner called me, okay, that's enough of that. He said, I've got 150 of your cards, I said, you want to buy something? He didn't want to buy it.
Did you sell something off of these business cards is the question mark?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, I've always had success.
No, I'm talking about at the grocery store.
Oh, at the grocery store, he probably didn't sign anything, he probably got in trouble, because, you know, there's other realtors shop too, you know? There's always more realtors, you think there's millions of them, that's a funny thing, you see it all the time, you go to a listing appointment or work with a buyer, and you think everybody's got 10 realtors, they don't, you know? Most people just don't have a realtor. I mean, we think they do, maybe the people you wanna work with, specifically your friends or something like that. Now, they all have realtors. It's the other people don't have realtors. But yeah, no, I've always had a lot of success doing whatever I did, and I've done everything that you guys have done, and now I'm with the thing at the family reunion, I'm in that last stage, the winter stage. So we'll go there. All right, so we're gonna talk about, I mean, this is basically a buyer's contract we're entering into. We'll talk both sides, but really, when you're working with buyers, you have to understand that, in this case is a great example. At some point, it'll get there. But it doesn't matter who the buyer is. It can be a trust, it can be an LLC, it could be a corporation, it could be a named business, it could be O'Reilly Automotive up there on the top line. But on that last line on page 8, when the seller signs, it has to be somebody with blood. It has to be a living being. And so that is typically in their documents, you know, in the corporation documents or the trust documents or ownership documents, whatever it is, who can actually buy and sell real estate. So if somebody wants to buy theirs in a trust, then the first question you should have is, do you have a copy of the trust? Because you're gonna have to have that for the title company. And what happens, I've seen it happen a lot over the years, is that we get there and they have to have 2 signatures, right? A buyer and a husband and wife on a trust, sometimes both sign. And some of the LLCs require multiple signatures. I've seen some of the investment groups that rehab houses, they've got the same thing where they need multiple signatures, but it doesn't matter. Again, whoever goes on that top line, doesn't matter what it is or what their name is, whether the trust or corporation, has to be a legal entity. They can put their name right there. It could be, in this case, Adam J. Brown, but it could be Adam J. Brown LLC, but somebody's got to sign it that has blood running through them. They have to be warm blood, okay? Now, in this case, we've got Adam J. Brown. So what is the assumption we make?
It's an individual.
Is an individual and single, married. We don't have a clue, do we? It's not a bad idea, and not everybody practices this, but if Adam J. Brown signs that, it'd be a nice thing to put on their ASP, which is a single person. Or if it's Adam J. Brown and Susie Smith, but they're married, it'd be a nice thing to put on that line, husband and wife, HW. It's just something you can do to help the title company know where they're going, because they don't know whether he's married or not, do they? And so they're gonna have to do that research going in to see whether he's married or not.
What if they're divorcing during the contract, during the sale?
They still have to go on the line,
Right, but I mean, should that be on there or just notification to?
on the line.
Yeah, I don't know.
About to be divorced.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so, but of course you should inform the title
Title
company.
company, okay.
And if they've got any documentation, you're gonna have to
Yeah.
have it anyway, because the documentation is gonna say how to split the proceeds.
Yeah,
Because, you know, Missouri's a marital rights state and 50-50. Just, I have this question all the time from people, they're getting a divorce and the wife or the husband, doesn't matter, wants to buy another house. And the answer is, no,
Oh.
don't do it. Because if she does, and they're still in the divorce proceedings, the husband owns half the house. He has half the debt too, but it's the same way around. So don't do it. And I've even had the attorneys tell me that the marital rights waiver, not necessarily the best thing in the world. And we've had it done. I'm sure some of you guys have dealt with that. But if you have a divorce going on, encourage them not to buy anything. Just wait, just be patient, you know, for 3 or 4 years.
Years?
Yeah, they don't take that long. Anybody been divorced? Yeah, not me, but I wouldn't know. I fear too much. All right, so I have the residential contract here. Again, the buyer in this case is Adam Brown. And then we just have to have the address. And if you hadn't been around very long, or as long as I have, we used to have the legal description. We have to try to figure it out. We don't have to do that anymore. If you've got the common address, the title companies are good now and they can put it in. But you got to make sure you do have the county in there. Okay, number one. And then you've got to make sure that you have street, corner, circle, cul-de-sac. You gotta have that right, because if it's wrong and it's a government loan, they do one more search before they close it. If it comes up with something other than a street on there, you could lose the transaction because it'll be delayed until all those documents are run back through the underwriter again. You knew that already. Okay. Just wanted to remind you. I knew you guys knew all that. All right, if we have a legal description, you should attach it, not necessarily the tax CRS records, because it says don't attach this, don't use this as a legal description. But if you're selling a meets and bounds property, and you know what I'm talking about, right? Meets and bounds is 2 acres more or less, and here's the meets and bounds. I would attach that and have all parties initial it. They don't have to sign, but it needs to be attached, and then you would mark the box then, and then it becomes a part of the contract. Now, whether that's accurate or not is up to the title company, not you. So you give that to them as a start to do that. If you were selling a 5-acre property that's been broken off from a 30-acre property, then it better be surveyed, because it doesn't have a legal description. They can't make one up because it has to have a point of beginning and then an end. So really, if you're doing one of those and the seller doesn't have a survey, then I would, if I was representing the buyer, seller to provide a survey prior to closing. Contract says the buyer can get a survey if they want to, right? But I would say the seller to do it. And then you can negotiate from there, right? But right off the bat, you want to ask the seller to pay for it since he's the one splitting it from the other property. It's gonna go fast today. All right, inclusion and exclusions. They changed this on the new contract. You don't have to look, I mean, you don't have to get into it too much, but they made some changes. They've added a couple things in there that we didn't have before. But the key to this is, these are things that are supposed to be there. And we got sued over a propane tank right here because the house had a propane tank. It wasn't included or excluded, but it was a leased tank. I'm saying the brokerage. The propane company came after a couple months and got the tank, snatched it out of the yard, still had gas in it, and left. The house, all the water pipes burst, caused $160,000 in damage. So they sued the propane company and the insurance company who wouldn't pay it. And then they decided, oh yeah, we should throw Keller Williams in there too. Because they said that the agent didn't do his fiduciary duty by having that in the contract or making sure it was in the contract when they purchased, whether it was leased or owned. Is that fair? There's no wrong answers here, guys. We're not getting graded. It's not, I mean, yeah, it's fair. I mean, that's part of your responsibility as an agent. If you see a propane tank, the first question is it leased or owned? And if it's leased or owned, then, you know, you're going to include it or exclude it, one or the other.
Did the title company get sued too? Because
No.
wouldn't they have had to check to see the tank amount and what was in there?
Well, no, hey, buyers paid for gas at closing. And then said they still didn't have any responsibility. And the propane company, which was MS Propane, never heard of them, but they said they gave them notice. Well, you know how they gave them notice? They put it on their door. And guess where? The buyers still lived in California, so they didn't see it. I know, it wasn't that bad, 160 grand. We didn't pay all of it. But looking at this, there's some key ones. Propane for sure. Solar panels. Somebody sold a solar panel house yet? I tell you, they scare me to death. I don't even think I'd list one unless the solar panels are paid for. because there's always a note on them and the note's ridiculous and it goes on forever. So solar panels, whether you're a buyer's agent or a listing agent, seller's agent, you've got to ask, you know, do you own them? No. What are the payments? X. How much do you owe on them? X. Is that loan assumable by the buyer? And if it is, what's the payment? And because if you think about a solar panel in a first, second, third home type, it doesn't matter who the buyer is. If they're getting a loan, you add another $500 to $1,000 per month to their debt to income ratio, they might not be able to afford it, even high end. You know, they might be go, 150,000 for solar panels, that's a little high. But, you know, this is something that you've got to make sure that you look at. Some of the others, we've got the dog collars, the pet collars. I know nobody thinks about that, but if it's got a hardwired system underneath the ground, the collars are supposed to stay with the house. Now, I've seen that change if the previous owners had Rottweilers and the new owners have pugs. Then they can go ahead and have their collars because they won't fit, which is fine. Flush mounted speakers, that's becoming more of an issue. I mean, I call that a flush mounted speaker, but some other people might not call it. So if I am not sure, what do I do? Write it in there, just write it in. I don't care how much room it takes, write it in there. Over here on the hardwired security alarm systems, so many of the alarm systems now are wireless, right? So if you see a Ring doorbell and your buyer goes, you know, I want the Ring doorbell, then it needs to be included because you'll show up for the walkthrough and it'll be gone. And then you'll end up, I don't know what they cost, but they're not cheap. You might end up having to contribute to the purchase or the replacement. Because if you call the other agent and say, hey, the Ring doorbell's gone, he goes, yeah, it wasn't in the contract. Right? Over here we have barbecue grills and fire pits. I'm just throwing this out because everybody's doing the outdoor kitchens and they got the green egg, or maybe they got the flat top or whatever it is out there, but it's built in. Does it go with the house?
Yes.
It's built in. No? Do you show up and they got that big round green hole? Not a green egg anymore, just a green hole. And you call the other agent, he goes, well, you didn't include it in the transaction. And that
Even though
is
it's right
correct.
Even though it's right there,
Huh?
it says barbecue grills and fire pits built in.
Right. We're talking the fire pits, but the barbecue grill being built in, but not attached, you know, like an oven or a range.
Okay.
What would be your best bet?
We'll add it.
I'd add it. I wouldn't take any chances on that. They got that big, beautiful built-in kitchen out there. And it's got the grill and it's got the egg and it's got the, oh, what else could have? Refrigerator and all that. You better add it in. All appliances and grills currently in the outdoor kitchen to remain with the property. Okay? And then over here, we've got the refrigerator down there. No, there's no refrigerator on there, is there? Okay?
Where's the property?
Yeah. That's funny, isn't it? Why is the refrigerator the only thing in the kitchen that's not included? Got to write it in because everybody, if you'll notice, it says that this contract, not a seller's disclosure statement, not the MLS, or not other promotional material is what's included. Just the contract. So they've got all those pictures of that kitchen with that, you know, French door refrigerator for $5,000, and you show up for the walkthrough and there's that big green hole again. They've got every right to take it. We had one last year where they took the center island in the kitchen.
Not attached.
Wasn't attached, it was on wheels. They did the bump test on it, but if it's got electric to it, then you know it's attached, so you're okay. But they did, they took that. They also took the rack above the island. Couldn't do that.
That was.
That one they had to bring back, right? Yeah, they had to bring that one back. Anything else in here? You know about the curtains and the drapery? I'll just mention it again. All the hardware stays. You can take everything else, but you can't take the hardware. Okay? And if you want those Purple curtains, you just gotta include it. Gotta have those.
Blinds, adjustable blinds are considered hardware.
The blinds stay.
It's right as their window wall.
Yeah, the blinds stay. Blinds stay with the property unless they're excluded or reserved, which can happen, but the blinds stay. The other one that gets us every once in a while are the bathroom mirrors. They've made a little change in the new contract. If there's a mirror in the bathroom, attached or unattached, it's supposed to stay. I think they reference it now as vanity mirrors, but it's still in there.
Jim, what if there was cause I've got a house that's closing and I went by the other day and the guy was taking attached mirrors out of the garage. It couldn't have been, and I don't know why he took them down. It couldn't have been more than,
Attached mirrors
Like a
have to
workout
stay.
mirror?
yeah, it's like just two little panel mirrors. And I just wondered if we're gonna get into trouble for that,
Well, part of the contract, they're supposed to stay.
you know?
Yeah, if they're attached, it doesn't say where, so it just says they stay. That hadn't given us much problem, but the ones, the HGTV mirrors that lean up behind the vanity have given us a lot of problems where people come in and they're gone. You know, they just lean them up there, they don't attach them or screw them into the wall or anything.
So as a seller, could you always like say that you actually are going to take them in the contract?
can.
Okay.
Let's say you're reserving them or you're taking them, sellers, you've got that in the MLS, right? But just be reminded that what it says, it's what's in the contract that matters. So you're better off, even if if that's the only thing you're doing is to counter or tell the other agent. Now, remember, the mirrors in the bathrooms don't go with the property, and so you need to exclude that in your offer. And if they don't, you've got to catch it. Okay?
So even if there's exclusions on the MLS, if it's not excluded on the contract, then it's not
That's right.
in effect.
That's the way it's supposed to be. Now, you'd have a battle, obviously, and depends on who the broker is. You know, if it was Parker or Murney, you'd probably be okay, but if you had some of the other companies where the brokers aren't that strong, you know, they would, and don't understand or don't read the contracts that well, they'd fight you on it, say, you can't, baby, whatever, but they, that's not what the contract says. Because the MLS is a advertisement. And any promotional materials, you got all this stuff in the house, it's advertisements, you know. So if you want it, you should include it. Like we're selling this place down in Riverside. He's including all the furnishings except personal things, a couple little personal pictures and things like that. If I'm writing an offer on it, all furnishings and appliances currently in the home to stay, seller will provide a list of personal items that he's going to remove. Because you're talking probably 20 grand, 30 grand worth of stuff with, everything that's in there, couches, beds, all that stuff. It's probably a lot of money. But you want to protect your buyer and your seller when you do that. And then it says on 16, and this is the last part of this, but I just want to read it. To avoid misunderstanding, list below is included or excluded any items may be subject to question. Included such as non-affixed equipment or other personal property such as refrigerators, TVs, electronics, washer, dryer, and appliances. And notice in this one, it says, these people even put the cooktop in there even though it's attached, and the dishwasher even though it's attached, wall, oven, double, electric, double, and then the electric refrigerator or the refrigerator, they put that in there. This house actually had 3 refrigerators. Yeah, that's a mistake too, right? Because if you just put refrigerator to be included in the sale, and it's the refrigerator I have in the garage where I keep the little helper, it's not very pretty. It's green. But the one in the house is the double door stainless with all that stuff, So you want to write, if you want that refrigerator in the kitchen, my suggestion would be to put stainless steel refrigerators currently in the kitchen.
If seller wants to take the TV mounts, which are supposed to be included, are they responsible for filling the walls in or?
They have to be included in the
Just write it
contract
in,
because it's on our list up here. If you look at it, it's included.
Yeah.
It stays, the TV mounts do. So you've got to make repairs. And if you said you were going to do that, if I was representing the buyer, I would say that the repairs have to be cosmetically acceptable to the buyer. Because some of those, like, hell, if you look back here, this hole is 12 by 18. You know, so you go to patch that with drywall, you're gonna have to paint the whole wall. You can't just, and I've seen that, and that's why they put that in the contract, because people were taking the mounts and then they were patching and painting, but the paint didn't match after 11 years. So, you know, you want it to be cosmetically acceptable to the buyer. All right, purchase price is easy, but the problem is for newer agents, how do you determine the purchase price on a property? Well, I mean, here's the deal, all right.
What are they willing to pay?
Yeah.
What are they willing to pay?
But you know, the best thing to do is to do what for your buyer? If they say, hey, you know what, I really like this.
CMA.
Market.
Do a CMA, do a market analysis. You know, I mean, you're gonna be within 3 to 5% unless you don't know what you're doing. Wasn't this house, but I sold the house beside me and an agent showed it and she called me and said, hey, I can't find any comps for this. Well, I live back behind PetSmart in this area and there's 150,000 house and then a 200 and then a 150, then 175, and then there's a bunch of trees and then there's 300 and then there's a 600 and there's, you know, it's all over the place. I said, no, I mean, there's not a comp for that house. It's 4,000 square feet, all brick. I'm 1 acre in southeast Springfield. You don't have any. And it's not in a subdivision, no restrictions. I said, so it's not gonna comp, you know? Not if you're looking at our neighborhood, you know? So anyhow, but you can still do a CMA and say, you know what, if you bought this house and it was over here, still in 65804, it's probably gonna cost you around 600, you know, for this house. And, but she didn't write the offer, so I didn't care. But I think a CMA is the best way to approach it. If they tell you, you know, I have an interest in the house, you know, I'm thinking about making an offer and you've got a chance, run a CMA. Takes 5 minutes, look and see and say, you know what? Here's what I found, because you are a fiduciary. You know, it looks to me like they might be underpriced. Or it looks to me like they're grossly overpriced. Or this is pretty close to what the price should be. You know, it can be a little off depending on one thing or another. But what you love most about this house, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, were the finishes. Everything's perfect. You don't have to do anything. You could just walk in today. You know, so that may add a little value that's not showing up in the CMA. Or, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you said you're gonna have to replace the carpet, replace the flooring, and replace, you know, the kitchen cabinets. So this house probably in its current condition is overpriced for you. So, you know, your offer needs to reflect that. Now, we would have been crazy to do that a year and a half ago, right? But now you can do that. I mean, some houses are negotiating on price, right? Yeah, some, I mean, not many, but some. Anyhow, so the buyer says it's listed, this one was listed at 542. And this is the third offer this agent wrote, and I won't tell her who it is. But she kept, I would tell her, well, we've got a better offer. I had that on my listing where I could disclose offers, conditions. And so I would text her and text everybody and say, we've got an offer for X, you know? And she would send another offer. So this is her third one. So you got the 542 on this one, which actually the list price was 540. So that was good for the client, right? For my seller. And then they have earnest money of $1,000, which is good too. And they have no concessions. Now for the newer agents, concessions are typically something that offsets the cost for a buyer. You know, because if you get a FHA loan, $200,000 and it's 3.5%, you got to put down. That's $7,000 or $6,500, right around there. Well, you're going to have an additional $6,500 to $7,000 in fees. So when somebody says, I need concessions here, it's typically to offset their loan costs. It's not just because they want you to, the seller to pay more money. And my suggestion for newer agents is if your seller freaks out about that, explain it to them, first of all, what it's for. But then say, you know, we could counter and raise the price to say 50% of their concessions, and now you're only responsible for half of their concessions. And they would probably still qualify. Because if you go the full $7,000, you may take them out of the debt to income ratio again. But that's a good idea to do that if you're gonna do it. If the seller just freaks completely out and you can't handle them. Best way to handle your sellers. So I've got $150,000 house listed on North Fremont. And I sat him down and told him, I said, it's probably gonna be a government loan and they're gonna ask for concessions. How much are concessions? Well, if they pay a full price, so 3.5 times 150 is probably gonna be around $5,000. And then why am I paying that? And I explained the whole thing to him, but he knows up front now that here it comes, you're gonna get this. Unfortunately, we haven't got it. Must be a bad agent on that one. And then earnest money, we'll talk about that in paragraph 8, but we'll talk about it now. Here's the deal with earnest money. Do you have to have it to make the contract valid? No, the contract itself is valid, okay? Makes it valid. So earnest money goes to an escrow account, typically at a title company. I think Murney might still have an escrow account. We used to have one at Carol Jones when I was over there. Awful. Money goes into the escrow account, let's say at a title company. It's not coming out until they either close and it gets applied to the purchase price, or you get the signatures of both parties on a mutual release. Now, typically, if you ask for a mutual release, that means somebody feels like they've been harmed, right? And they want their money. So even though the buyer put down the $1,000, the seller, it's not going to close. The seller goes, I'm not signing a mutual release. You know, that money should go to me. So then the listing agent sends back over a mutual release, says the seller wants it, and the buyer goes, no, I want it. It's going to stay there for how long?
1 year.
It could stay.
1 year.
1 year, 365 days. And then if you don't reach an agreement, where does it go?
Slush fund.
Secretary of State gets it, goes into unclaimed funds. Guess how long it stays there?
Forever.
Till it freezes over. It's not coming back out.
What is freezing over?
H. It's gonna freeze over. But, all right, there is one option though. Your buyer and seller could get together and sign a notarized statement saying we've reached an agreement on how to release the money. So they send that to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State sends it where?
To the title company.
Title company, into an escrow account. Now what do you gotta have?
Mutual release.
Mutual release signed by both parties. I mean, earnest money is the biggest, there's gotta be a better way to do it, and I haven't figured it out. I really haven't. But I think you have to explain this to your clients too a little bit and say, you know, it goes into there and it may stay. I don't mind if I make an offer and they say, I want earnest money, then we can amend the offer and send it over. But I'm less likely to put it down anymore, just because of that reason, because how hard a fight it is. Now, the beauty for brokers, most of the brokers in my situation, I had a client call me, one of your clients called me last week and said, how come you won't release my earnest money? And I have nothing to do with it. You know, that's not my deal, and it's not the agent's deal either. It's not your deal. Title company's got it. You want it out, there's a document you have to have, and it's called a mutual release of earnest money. Should have gone ahead and did Beowulf. Now, they changed the contract a few years back to say the earnest money's got to be deposited in 5 days. I don't ever do that. I really think it's a mistake. The title companies are now using electronic deposits, which is fine if you get your clients to do it. But if they're going to give them a check, sometimes it's a Thursday before Memorial Weekend, you got 5 days, it's over with today. It was over yesterday. And if they forget, then the contract can be terminated by the seller without notice if they don't get the earnest money in there in time. So I always try to put 10 days in there at least. I'm gonna give my client plenty of time. And then what is my job as a buyer's agent?
Get that money.
Just stay on them, boy. You know, you get that money in there yet? call them one day, text them the next, email them the third day, and then start over again until the money gets deposited. We have one under contract on Jefferson right now. The earnest money, it's a agent used to be here, but the earnest money is supposed to be deposited 10 days ago. It's 20 days into the contract and hadn't been deposited. Well, it got deposited now, but we could have just terminated the contract. Wouldn't she have squealed like a pig? It's perfectly legal. They could have just said, you know, sorry, you missed a date. That's the way it goes. That's what the contract said. If you look on 29, it talks about additional earnest money. That is more common with new construction. You've gone in and made a change or something and the builder wants additional earnest money. You don't have to worry about that. But if you run into that, there is a rider for that, just like there is for everything else. Then on closing, this is where we select the closing agent for the first time, and this is a title company. The key is your buyers, most of you know this, but for the new agents, the buyer doesn't have a clue. You say, where do you want to close? And they don't know what you're talking about. I mean, they know that they're buying a house, but they don't know what a title company is or what a title company does. And so you're going to have to guide them. Now, I have a pet peeve with the people that say, you have to close at X title company. I mean, that it's just, I know what that is, you know. They've got a little stuff going on there somewhere, giving you some groceries or something. There's something going on, maybe helping you on your website or something like that. I mean, that me off because I don't get that. And I close at 2 or 3 different title companies. So
With me.
I know. But the point is I'm more likely to write something else in there than I am that, unless it's new construction. New construction, I get it. Builder's got all his funds there, escrows, everything, pays all his workers out of there. But if you say I gotta close at X, Y, Z, if it was me writing it, you're probably gonna see CBS or something like that. You're not gonna see X, Y, Z. But I always give the buyer a couple choices, at least. I don't give them 3. I know it's a standard rule up on the state level. I just give them a couple choices. So I've had a lot of luck with these title companies and I trust them. And that trust deal is really big because that's where you should be closing. Not because they got drinks in the fridge, or they're really nice, or they got candy out on the bar, or whatever it is.
What
These
about if
people,
they have good pens?
if they got good pens,
That's
not
a
for
pretty big
me.
deal.
But I mean, a good title company is one that as soon as there's a problem, they're on the phone. They're not sending you an email. They're on the phone saying, hey, we got a problem with this transaction. And here's what it is. And it could be an easement, it could be a lien, federal tax liens, you know, you guys don't have any, but there's more than you can imagine out there. You know, we sold a house in Emerald Park one time that for $356,000 back a while back. And they had a $365,000 federal tax lien on it.
I think that's the thing to consider though, like we don't necessarily say one on the buy side, but on the listing side, we do choose one because they do pre-title work for us on every listing we take. So that the buyer doesn't have to worry about that ahead of time.
That's a good one.
Nice try, Monica.
Now you can't be mad
I
at
see
me.
that all the time too, though. I see where,
Groceries.
and I get that.
I wish they would give me.
The title work has been completed or has been initiated at a certain title company. I'd be more apt to do that than please close at my favorite title company, which is basically what most people are saying. And some of them, and you know this for a fact, are owned partly by the agent that's telling you to close there. And they're getting a financial benefit. And I don't see that anywhere in the contract. Isn't that what that affiliated business referral form's for? Yeah, anyhow. So you put down your title company down there, and on this one, she put Hogan Land and Title, Ashley McBride. Fine. I mean, Hogan's been around for 60 years. I don't expect them to mess much stuff up. They do, they make errors, but that's fine. I accepted that. You don't have to name the specific agent, even though it says agent. It's actually, the closing agent is the title company itself. But she did that, and then she put 1605 Sunshine because you have to name the address if there's multiple companies in town. You have to have a specific location that you're gonna close at. And then she said on May 10th, 2024. Okay? Who picks the closing date? I mean, the buyer does usually, and it's usually, what do they say? As soon as possible. But who should you have already talked to?
Lender.
The lender, because the lender is really the guy closing, I mean, he's the one that's gonna say when we can close or not close. Hey, you guys, again, you're lucky because like 10 years ago, maybe 5 even. FHA, VA, USDA was 45 to 60 days and USDA could be 90. Now everybody closes in about 30 days. You can get it done in about 30. Conventional is about 30. Cash is whenever you want to close within 5 or 6 days. But in this case, the buyer picked the closing date of May 10th, which is fine. But again, it has to be fine with who?
Seller.
Lender first and then the seller. So we send this to the seller and the seller may go, I want May 17th. And if that's the only thing they want changed, is that a counter? What's a counter mean?
You're changing the term.
Does it mean yes or no?
It means no, but
It means
we're
no.
proposing something different.
Yeah. Counter means no. Rejection means no. Accepted means yes. Counter is no. This offer is not, no. I mean, they're not rejecting it, but if they counter and that's the only thing they change, the buyer can fly away as fast as possible. So you would counsel your seller, or what you would do is have a conversation with the other agent, say, any way you can go to the 17th on this, and then maybe get it changed beforehand, hopefully. All right, brokers aren't responsible for the delivery of keys. Has anybody ever closed a transaction in here? Have you closed one? Anybody ever? Raise your hand if you've closed one. Okay. Have you delivered keys? Yeah, we still do it. A lot of times now, we'd take a listing and the seller won't even have a key, right? They've always gone in the garage door or something like that, but we do it. And then we've got to bring all the garage door openers and all that, and never fails. They got one garage door opener for 3 garage doors. And so I bought a few of those in my time. I've taken now to asking the clients if they had those button things up on their dash or on their head thing. Yeah, because those things work, right? Yeah.
I think a lot of times you have to have the remote to program them to work.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know
No, you
that.
just have to have a father-in-law that knows.
Obviously, I don't use the buttons on mine.
You can call any local garage door company and they'll walk you through it.
And it says should change locks, the buyer should following possession. If you want to give a closing gift, you're a new agent, 417 rekey. Just don't change the locks, just rekey. It's about $125, but, and I know you can't take it off your taxes. That's horse poop. I don't care if you're watching or not. I take everything off of my taxes. It's a business expense. If I have to pay for that, I'm not doing the, whatever they say, $25, is that what they say you're allowed?
I think it's $25 a closing.
I take everything off.
Have the rekey company put your name on their door handle now, and then it's just a marketing expense.
Yeah, marketing expense. I just call it a business expense and go on, I don't care. But anyhow, that's a great gift. Now, possession after closing for a seller is bad. Possession before closing by a buyer is bad. If you want to do it, there's riders for it. And there's reasons for it. But the one I like is this one, the limited purpose entry by buyer prior to closing. Don't you like that? Have you used that a lot? Well, if you haven't, you should. Because think about this. We're asking somebody to move from this house, I don't care, let's say they're in Willard, to this house in Springfield, and the seller's got to move out, the buyer's got to move in. That's almost impossible. So what I always do is ask for possession of at least one garage space in the house. And if it's vacant, I'll ask for 2. We won't enter the house at all, but I want the garage spaces so my client can take 7 days or so, or 6 days, and move all their boxes in. They're still covered. Their insurance, their liability insurance covers them, even when their property's at another location. The seller still has insurance. He's protected. And that's the way to do it. And then the movers come on the day of closing. Oh, well, they got to move. tables, chairs, couches, beds, things like that. Everything else is gone. Don't you like that? You should use that. If you're selling a farm, use that. Because you can't move 50 cows in one day, or pigs, or cats, or trailers, or tractors, or any of that stuff. You should use this, and farmers understand it perfectly. You just tell them, say, look, you got the field sectioned off into 8 sections. Can we use this section over here and unload some cattle? We'll take full responsibility, liability for any damage they do. And they do go, yeah, sure. And can we park 3 trailers over here? And yeah, you can do that. All right, if it's tenant occupied, which Jen knows about these for sure, you've got to use a rider, and you've got to really protect both parties, the buyer coming in, but also the tenant that's in there, because they have tenants' rights, and the government gets really mad about that stuff if you mess with them. So full notice to them, obviously, and then if they have a lease in place, the lease passes with the property. If there's no written lease, then they're basically on 30 days, but you can't give them notice, you can't, as a buyer, until you own the property. All right, in this case, we have that sell contingencies in the contracts not contingent on the sale or closing of an existing property by the buyer. Yay, that's good, right? We see this a lot, and we see it more now, which is this contract is contingent upon the sale and or closing of an existing property. If this box is checked, you've got to complete a rider and you've got to attach it, or the contract's not a valid contract. Contingency for sale of buyer's existing property, that means that the property may not even be listed. So your first question is it listed? Yeah, I mean, how's it going? How many showings have you had on that $150,000 property on North Fremont? Oh yeah, 17, and it hadn't sold? Wonder what's wrong.
Price too high.
You got it. So this one is a little tougher, but you've got to ask a lot of questions. On the contingency for closing a buyer's existing property, that means it's under contract and it's heading to closing. If it's already through inspections, is that a good contract? Yeah, it's just like a loan. I mean, it can still fall apart because they do, but at the same time, I would probably accept that unless we were in a multiple offer situation. That would be just as good as, the loan going through. But you still ask questions, right? If they're local, you can look it up on the MLS. If they're out of state, you can contact their agent out of state and see what the property's doing. On the appraisal contingency, we've had one today, and we had one yesterday, and then we had one on Friday, where an agent not with our company, the buyer's agent, missed the appraisal deadline. What that means is they wrote an offer for X, and the appraisal came in lower, but they missed the deadline to send over the appraisal notice. So how does that affect the buyer?
You're required to buy it.
The buyer is supposed to show up with funds for closing. Now, the lender's already said, look, I'm gonna loan you the money, but I'm gonna loan you this much money. I'm gonna loan you based on the appraisal, not on the contract price. That's what that lender does. So if it's $295,000 and the appraisal comes in at $260,000, the lender's loaning up, his basis is $260,000, not $295,000.
What was the end result of these debacles you're talking about?
Yeah, they're a mess. So, I mean, part of your responsibility as buyer's agents then is, I'm writing this right here down on line currently. 66.
63 is where it's
Where's it at?
blank days, on this contract at least. Yeah, so on line 63, seller no later than blank days, 25 if none stated, that?
Oh yeah, 25 is non-stated. So I'm putting in there 5 days before closing, maybe 7. But I really think you ought to consider this now because the lenders don't get that appraisal out 3 weeks before you close. They typically get it out 4 or 5 days, maybe 7 days before. If you extend it all the way to the end, we've got brokers that'll tell their agents to reject it. So, I mean, get it close enough that you've got time for the appraisal to come in. And then if the appraisal does come in low and you're representing the buyer, you send an appraisal notice and say, look, the appraisal came in at 260, our contract price is 295. The buyer wants the price adjusted to the appraisal price. And then the seller has 5 days to respond. Don't change that. You want him to get back quick to make a decision. And he can either reduce the price to 260. He could negotiate, couldn't he? Yeah, he could say, I can't do 260, but I'll do 275.
Jim, I think that's why going back to you saying for your buyer to do a CMA is because in the very beginning, we shouldn't be writing offers on properties that I understand that we don't always know that. But sometimes it's not a matter of whether they will pay or not, but if they're getting government financing, the likelihood of them having cash to close
Yeah.
above that is really slim.
Yeah, and those are the options. So the options are seller reduces the price right down to the appraisal value. Buyer just says, the heck with it. I like the house. I'm buying 30,000 more. Not gonna happen very often. Or they can meet in the middle, right? They can divide it somewhere. Or what's the last one?
Bye-bye.
Buyer terminates the contract without penalty and earnest money is to be returned per paragraph 8. You know what paragraph 8 says? You gotta have a signed mutual release. But don't let this happen to your clients. That's a bad deal and that would be on you if you were a buyer's agent. If you're a listing agent, you hope it doesn't happen too, because it means that you missed the list price by a significant amount. You got that? So you do whatever you want to, but what Jim's gonna do is put 5 to 7 days before closing. I used to put all the way to the end, but the brokers in the brokers meeting just used to give me about it to say that you're teaching that over there, blah, blah, blah. And I was. So I changed it.
So I still am.
5 days.
So I have a question then.
But then
What
you
about, oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
What about, so I have one now that they want to do a short close and it's conventional, but my inspection period goes past that close date. And so now who's at fault if my inspection notice isn't due yet? And
Well,
close date.
I just think it was a mistake on both agents' parts not to adjust the contract dates to match the closing date. I mean, you knew that the buyer had X, right? Number of days. And that you have 10 days to respond, right? That's 25 days. So if you're closing in 20, you might look at that and go, hey, wait a minute, this won't work.
So should I have countered even though we accepted their offer, I would counter those days?
Or just told them up front, you know, because I'm gonna put 15, we'll get to it in a minute, but I put 15 on every inspection. But if you're closing in 25 days, that's the entire period, right? 15 days for the inspection. They give the notice fee on the 15th day and then you got 10 days to respond. You respond on the 10th day, they don't have a chance to respond. Now, the other option, I think we talked about the other day, is you could extend the contract. You extend the closing another 10 days to give you time to respond and get repairs done and all of that, you know, or agree to a monetary change to the contract to fit into that. We didn't talk, I mean, I didn't tell you that the other day. I didn't want, because we're on the phone, you know, but it's the responsibility of both agents to know, right? If you're closing in 20 days, and you got 25 days combined in the inspection period and the resolution period, wait a minute, that won't work, will it? Unless they get you the inspection notice really early, which doesn't sound like this agent did, right?
Right. Yeah, they waited till the 11th hour.
Yeah, oh yeah, it was right 11 o'clock?
Yeah.
On the 10th, 15th day or whatever, right?
Can I circle back around to something really quick with
Yeah,
this
you do whatever you
appraisal?
want to, you're running it.
Okay, well, thanks. All right, so something that I've always done and taught people to do is in special agreements, right? All loan and appraisal contingencies to run effective through closing.
Hmm.
And now I'm just now getting pushback on that from other agents. So that goes to the exact same thought here. So instead of writing that in, because it really doesn't protect, we gotta change the dates on those lines to like, if it's a 40-day closing, make it 35 days.
You can write that in, but it's the brokers that are pushing back on you. So it is.
I think too, what we're seeing too more is a lot of like TBDs, and like Dan the other day flipped out and he was like, you never write TBD on a legal contract. Like you have to have a date, read it back, map your dates out backwards.
One of
and
our
figure
agents
it
wrote
out.
that, or somebody sent it to us.
It was probably one of our.
Someone on
To
our
be
team
determined?
tried to write it that way, and we're seeing them.
You can't, that's not a legal contract. That's not valid to put
Correct.
to be determined. I
Right.
mean, it's not even you just throw it in the fire. It's no good. Because the things that you have to have, like you could write a contract on a piece of toilet paper. It has to have what's being sold. It has to have the price that will be paid, where you're gonna do it at, close it at, when you're gonna close it. And then the signatures of both parties. That's a whole contract there. The rest of it's all lawyer stuff they threw in there. That's all you have to have, but to be determined.
Yeah, I think it was a contingency on a contingency to a contingency.
we
So
still
they
have
should have
to
done like
number.
60 days or sooner, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you
Okay.
can't, well,
Well, it's implied that it's or sooner, right?
well, back to that other, I mean, when you put the date on the contract, that's an honor before date, always. And we still have agents who've been around a long time, like me, who write honor before. You don't have to, it's always honor before. It just can't go past.
Some of the lenders will require it though.
Honor before?
Yeah, we've had to amend the contract when we closed
You
early.
don't have to listen to lenders.
Well, if they won't give us the money if we
It's not
don't.
a valid, I mean, it doesn't invalidate the contract, but, so what is that date?
They made us change the closing date. They made us amend it to the new closing date.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean,
Oh, yeah, I agree with that.
yeah.
I think you should have it in writing. So if it's May 10th and all of a sudden we all decide May 5th, we're gonna send an amendment out. It's gonna be in writing. If you don't send the amendment out and you don't close on the 5th, guess what?
They have till the
You
10th.
still got till the
Yeah,
10th. That'd be a reason not to do it. But
But Jim, if you put in special agreements that those appraisal contingencies are to continue through closing date, and then just if you get pushback from the or from the listing agent, then you could pivot and do some exact days. To me, the downside of putting the exact days, if something happens and then you do it, an amendment, you change the closing date, now you gotta make sure that you're still in line with all those other dates.
I agree with it. Look, I don't mind the other. I mean, I don't necessarily like it if I'm representing the seller. I understand the broker's pushback. It's one of the loud brokers over at the brokerage field says, buyer needs to be able to get out of a contract. The hell, it's a contract, You don't need to be able to get out. You're in it or you're not in it, So I didn't agree with that part, but he's raising up poop that, I've changed mine a little bit.
Well, I wonder if to pivot on that, maybe in the compromise might be that you put in special agreements that it's to continue until 5 days prior to the closing date.
Oh, you
And that way
could.
you're kind of protected if the closing date gets moved by 30 days or something, but yet it still accomplishes the fact that.
That's
they don't
something to
wanna wait
remember on
until
all your
the hour.
contingencies. If you have to extend for some reason, loan contingency, appraisal contingency, inspection, whatever it might be, you should extend those contingencies in the amendment when you extend the contract. They should all be extended. If you don't, they do run out. They don't adjust to the closing date.
Unless you had a provision for it in the special agreement.
Exactly, like you just said. That's a good idea. So what'd you say again?
Just, like if the objective for a listing agent or seller is to not wait until, a day before closing to find out that the appraisal didn't come back right. They want to know a week before, 5 days before or something. Let's put in the special agreements that those dates are to expire 5 days prior to closing. And then that way, if the closing gets moved by 30 days, those dates will automatically get moved along with it. Rather
Yeah.
than putting a firm number of days.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds good. I think it's almost a legal line question. Whether you could just write that in there, because it doesn't give a specific date.
Well, it does. It's 5 days prior to whatever closing
But-
date is on the contract. Right?
If the closing gets extended,
then that would automatically be extended to
I
5
just
days.
say it's a legal line question.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I think you should send that up to legal line and see what they say.
I mean, me personally, I'm gonna keep writing that it's through the closing date until I get pushback, and if and when I get pushback, then I'll pivot and
You got
adjust.
get pushback and then you change it to your language right there.
There you go. I'm not
And then you
gonna,
get pushback
I'm not gonna
again.
pivot until I get pushback, so.
The funny thing about appraisals is for some reason, and I'm not sure why, but the appraisers, if you've got a closing date of May 10th, they don't go out like as soon as they get the contract. They wait, and I'm not sure why. I mean, in Springfield, in our area, we have a 90% plus closing rate, so it's not like they're not getting paid. I don't know what it is. I mean, I think they should go out the day they get it, right? The other thing I hate is that I know they get the contract price. I'm not sure whether that's the best thing or not, that they,
Well, yeah, because the appraisals always come back
Yeah.
$1,000 more than the contract price.
that's when you know the appraiser had it. We've had two, personally ourselves, in the last month that have come in low. One was on a condo down in Point Royale. And what was crazy about it, 3 other condos sold in the same little group. And they all sold for more per square foot than this condo. And they were all furnished. I mean, it's just like, I didn't get it. We called the appraiser. He goes, well, I had to make this adjustment, and that adjustment, and this adjustment. They're speaking French. You don't know what they're talking about. Have you read the appraisal where it says subtract $9,000 for carport or something like that? It's just something you're thinking, okay. But ours had a carport and they still adjusted it 9,000. All right, we've got to move on contingencies, not contingent upon financing. The buyer is going to buy the property, but they may finance part of it. And a lot of people do this that have cash. Maybe they got enough cash to buy this house and they're going to do a flip on it or a rehab. But then they get about halfway through it and say, you know what? I'm going to borrow 50 grand off my line of credit or whatever it might be. So, but they're still closing. So you don't have to worry about it. Now you can ask, and that's what it says. You got a pre-approval letter or something from, to show that they have enough funding to purchase. But I wouldn't worry about that one. I wish that was on every contract. That'd be fine with me. Non-conventional, this is a government loan, and if you check that box, you must have a rider. We're not seeing much on loan assumptions. It probably won't, because it doesn't look like the economy is going to go completely in tank or anything like that. So we probably won't see many loan assumptions. And what's funny about that, a lot of the VA and FHA loans are assumable, you know what? But there's something about, you can only assume what's left on the loan. I didn't know that. I just thought you could assume the whole thing at 2.78%. And then what they do is then they have to have a second loan for the remaining portion. So you get that 2.78, but the remaining portion, which is like, let's say it's 20,000, then they charge you an exorbitant rate because such a small amount, it's under $50,000. So they'll charge you basically commercial plus 1 point in prime or something. So it doesn't work out too good. Not as good as I thought it did. I just thought everybody could assume all those 3% rates. Conventional loan, that's typically is 95% loan or less. Now, just recently, bankers have told me they have an FHA conventional. Honestly, I swear to God they did. And it's 96.5. And then today I got a call from an agent who is selling a property, and the lender told her that it was a USDA conventional loan. Swear to God I did. And I said, well, I've never heard of that. Probably ought to have them send some explanation or something. But in our world, mostly conventional means 95% or less. Conventional is typically is not as many challenges as some of the government loans. And the government loans aren't nearly as bad as they used to be. They used to have to replace water lines and septic tanks and just all kinds of stuff. Now it's typically chip paint, handrails, broken glass, things like that. and occasionally something in the attic, but not that common. But I mean, FHA, none of those government loans scare me anymore. The key to this is though, if you check the box, you must attach your rider. Now, it goes into a lot of gobbledygook in here, but the key you need to see is the loan contingency deadline on line 80, correct? That should be the term of the contract or within 5 to 7 days. Or you could put his language in there.
I just I don't want to have 25 different dates in the calendar of my phone to make sure that I don't miss all these different dates. That's my
Good
goal.
idea, actually. You put everything in there, all contingencies run through closing date, even if it's changed.
That's line 8. Wait, which one are you at?
I'm at line 80,
You said 5 to 7 days?
loan contingency
Before
deadline.
closing, is what he was saying.
The buyer has to deliver notice if they don't get a loan during this time period. If they deliver notice, then they can terminate the contract without penalty, and the earnest money be returned per paragraph 8. However, if you miss that deadline, and then you look down at line 95, if the loan contingency deadline passes without a termination, buyer remains obligated under this contract and must have available all funds required to close. That means FHA, VA, USDA too. It means everybody. So it's really a good idea to extend that out either through closing or 5 to 7 days closing, or use some language that makes it work. Now on 87 through 90, you have to fill in some of that. I think the MRAC is gonna ding us and some other companies on this too. Because a lot of people will put TBD in there and TBD, and you can't put TBD in there. Even
I
Lene
feel like
Sawyer,
that's how some of us were trained.
not me.
Are
I've never told you to
Are you
TBD.
sure?
Yeah, we got recordings of all these
I'm
things.
going back to the recording.
Go back, because I've never put a TBD in there in my life. It's not that hard to figure that if you're getting a conventional loan, it's gonna be 95% or less. And typically, you've talked to the lender or you've talked to the buyer, if you're representing them, and they say, I'm gonna put down 20%. You put 80 in there. You don't have to put anything where the purchase price is, because if they said, I'm getting 23%, you'd have to get out your phone and you don't have to do all that. But the 80% is kind of a key, and then the interest rate is really key. If you're representing a first-time home buyer and you've talked to the lender and the lender says the interest rate right now is 6.75. The next question might be, what happens if it goes to 7%? If it increases, can they still buy? And a lot of times it's no, because they're that close on their debt to income ratio. So that's the number you should put in there, because you're trying to protect your buyer. And in this case, 7.75, that was a full point above what it was when they wrote the offer. I would have been real comfortable with that. But if I was representing the buyer, I'd want to talk to the lender. And then typically your amortization is going to be 30 years, and then typically it's going to be fixed. I was in the first recession with the 18% interest rates down in the Branson area when I first started working. Ton of adjustables, because they were 1, 2, or 3 points below the normal interest rate. Little risk there, but still, I haven't seen any adjustable rate mortgages on anything that I reviewed. All right, so I already talked about the fact if you don't send the loan contingency deadline, if you don't send the notice saying that they can't get a loan, and this notice must come from the lender, not just you sending an email, must come from the lender, and then you can forward it over, but the lender has to say you've been denied. It has to be valid. It actually says an affidavit, but typically an email from the lender is legitimate. Then they will be committed to purchasing. Now, you think of an FHA buyer that's got 3.5%, are you gonna sue them? Probably not. I mean, that's everything they've got. Now, a conventional buyer on a $542,000 house, I mean, I would probably sue if they failed to close, if they claimed that they couldn't get a loan. I'd want something specific, but if they pass the deadline, we're gonna try to go to close if I'm representing the seller. And then we might have to, not we, the seller would pursue litigation. I wouldn't encourage it, but I sure as heck wouldn't discourage it. All right, title and survey. Typically, the title companies are really good about getting a title out or the title commitment out in 10 days. But again, that's why you want to work with title companies that you trust, and you should stay on them. And just like he's talking about putting dates in his phone, you should have that date somewhere. We wrote the contract on this date, we need the title commitment by this date. And you look, most of them are really good. They knock it out like that. And they can because these transactions, like this house actually had never sold. But the majority of houses have sold 2 or 3 times, so they've got a basis to start with. So it's just a matter of amending the title work to add the names and the loans and all that. So 10 days, at least. If it's a farm or a commercial property, you might need more time, right? Title commitments don't come quite as quickly on the commercial properties. Now, there's 4 choices there of how this title work should be paid for. And look, guys, we can go all through it, but C is the right choice. Seller shall deliver to buyer a title commitment. In other words, the seller is paying the title company for a title search to send out a title commitment. And then the buyer pays for an owner's policy, and that's a policy that ensures the title during their ownership. I think that's fair. I don't think the seller should have to pay for the buyer's anything.
I have one question. Okay, in the event that they're doing concessions, would you?
But they don't count. Concessions don't count towards
Does
this.
it, okay, I didn't think so, but
Yeah, we see it over on paragraph. I
I
think
would just explain it, the buyer is paying for that because it's the buyer's responsibility to prove that they have a sellable property. And that's when paying for the search.
when the buyer pays for it.
On C, if the buyer, and then the seller is paying if they want coverage. Because the buyer's paying for the commitment, right?
No, on C, the buyer's paying only for their owner's policy. The seller pays for the search, which includes a title commitment. Seller shall deliver to buyer a title commitment at seller's cost. It's typically, it used to be 150, I think it's around 200 now. And then the buyer just pays for their policy when they close. And that policy price is typically based on the amount they borrow. But see, I don't think the seller should pay a couple $1,000s of the buyer's cost, which would be A. I don't agree with that. You guys okay with that back there? On D, if you wanted to sweeten the deal, you get to call the other agent and say, look, my buyer is gonna pay for that title commitment and the buyer's policy. You know, that's a sweet deal. It's like $200. But most agents don't get that. So you can just tell them that and they think, whoa, you know? So you're sweetening the deal a little bit. You're not sweetening it a lot. Now down there on the title commitment, it's going to be issued typically by the title company you named on page 1. So we have Hogan Land and Title here. But then notice on 107, it says the buyer has a right to get a survey. You know, we used to have to get a survey prior to about 2000 on every property we sold. Even these little houses, we had to get a survey. Lots, we had to get a survey. And then the title company started saying, oh, that's all right. No big deal. But the buyer can get a survey. And again, if you're buying a farm or raw land, I really think you need a survey. And it says here that the buyer can do it as an expense and liability. But it also goes on down there to say, and it's actually on the next page, it's kind of crazy that you have 20 days after the effective date of the contract. Well, that's not enough time to get a survey. So if you're gonna get a survey, you better go 45 to 60 days and you better pray there's a surveyor available. Because it takes a little bit longer. Okay, so on 111, you could put 10 there if you wanted there. If it's a farm, I'm putting 20 because I'm reviewing the title commitment. And then I'm getting to the closing or close to the closing on line 115 on the next page. Now, if there are objections in the title, if the title company says you've got a problem, whose responsibility is it to fix it?
Seller.
The seller. And it's clearly stated in this paragraph on the next page, it's the seller's responsibility to make change, fix whatever it is prior to closing. Or the buyer can terminate the contract without penalty. And if the buyer is paid for a survey which turned up less acreage, easements, pothole, or what do you call those things? Sinkholes, whatever it might be, then the seller, if the buyer terminates because the seller won't fix it, then the seller is responsible to pay for the survey. You have to pursue them typically, but it's their responsibility. It's right in the contract. Okay? If they got a survey that showed the defects, you send a defect notice basically to the seller. The seller says, I'm not fixing anything. And the seller is responsible for paying for the survey if it terminates. All right, paragraph 7 has to do with inspections. This is the easy section. All right, I'm going to read this to you. I want you to understand this. Is everybody listening?
Yes.
7A, line 134, the property is being sold in its present condition with no warranties expressed or implied. What does that mean? As is. Except maybe given to the buyer in writing. They could say, we're going to replace this, we're going to replace that. Conditions of the property that are disclosed or clearly visible should be considered by buyer in setting the purchase price or by making a correction of such conditions by seller requirement of the contract. Okay? What that's saying is you walk into a house and the glass is broken on the front door, what should you do?
Put it in the contract.
Put it in the contract, ask them. I mean, you walk in, the carpet is terrible, dogs
Or
are.
put on an inspection notice. I think one of us just got that,
Did
putting,
you?
yeah.
Dogs have chewed up the carpet, right into the contract. You know, seller to replace the flooring, or they won't do that, all right, seller to remove the carpet. Just get it ready for me to put down flooring. Seller to paint the bedroom that's all black in a neutral color of their choice. You know, you don't want black ceilings and black walls in your kids' bedrooms. It kind of leads to bad things. You don't want that. Okay? I just want you to understand that. And then notice it says, look, if there's problems, you probably should think about that when you make the offer, right? So you should adjust the price. Unless the CMA's, comes in and if the value's too low. But we can do that again. The market's changed a little bit. Now, you're not gonna win every time, but at the same time, if you're protecting your buyer, you keep that in mind. Also, it says in here that you've got to figure out whether you can get insurance right now for the buyer. This is becoming more of a problem. If you probably didn't attend that insurance class she had last week because there's only 2 or 3 people here, but insurance is really becoming an issue and it's really becoming expensive. Mine's $5,000 a year now, and I haven't had a claim in 24 years. That's not right, is it?
No.
But it's doing that with everybody. And now they're also saying that we're not going to issue replacement policies for roofs over 10 years or 15 years, which in the past, you got hell, you just got your roof replaced. But it's really changing. So note, the cost and availability of insurance should be ascertained during the inspection period. So really, how many days do you have? 15, if that's what you mark, because all you've got to get insurance, you need to tell your buyer, whoever you want to get insurance to, they should drive by this house and they've got it's called a cart report, I think. They've got a cart report on the house. They'll know if there's, any claims or anything. Notice the other thing. The buyer can do all their own inspections, and the buyer can even appraise the house. You don't have to have a real live inspector. The buyer can do it themselves. Who likes that part, huh?
I thought they had to be qualified to do it.
He used to say that in the contract, had to be a qualified.
Did they change that?
Oh, yeah.
'Cause it said-
Look at, look at line 155. I skipped a little bit because I'm gonna go back to the property data. Buyer may, at buyer's option and expense, obtain written inspection reports of the condition of the property, blah, 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 by buyer or its lender, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. But the buyer may do this.
But on line 137. Did you say qualified inspector or did I just,
You just said that to yourself.
oh,
Line 137, it says, buyer may inspect the property or have it inspected by a or have it inspected by a qualified inspector. He can, look, the buyer can also do an appraisal, it says, which, banks is gonna accept, but we have to accept it. If a buyer does the inspection and puts it on paper in writing and sends it to us, the inspection notice, we have to accept it.
That's different with like government loans.
Well, you have to have, on an appraisal, he couldn't appraise it on a government loan, because they would accept it. No bank would accept a buyer. Like if I went out to appraise a property, even when you do a CMA, like I've done them for the courts, for legal, it says right on the front, this is not an appraisal. So it wouldn't be accepted by a bank, no matter what. But the inspection report is loosey-goosey enough that the buyer can do it himself. The buyer can physically do it. And it's typically the guys that are retired contractors, or their daughter's buying a house and they've been in the building trades all their lives, which is fine, except it's, it causes problems sometimes. We don't want dads or moms or aunts or uncles inspecting the property. 144 on B on the property data. This, when it came out, it still should be referred to as the buyer remorse paragraph. Because what happens is, it's so loosely written that, let's say we put 5 days in there, the buyer has 5 days to review the property or property data review period. Now, it gives a list of things they can be looking at, which I get, subdivision documents, rules and regulations, where's the other one that everybody scares everybody?
Registered sex offenders.
Yeah, sex offenders, crime, whatever. I get it. But at the same time, that is not how it's used. Most of the time, what happens is they find another house. That's one. 2, their mother-in-law comes over and says, I can't believe you're buying this house in this neighborhood. 3, dad comes over and goes, I can't believe you're buying this piece of junk. And they just terminate the contract. And guess what they have to send to terminate it? An email. We're terminating the contract after reviewing the data. That's it. Or you don't have to say that. Terminate the contract per the contract data review period. That's it. It could be paint colors. It could be the driveway is too steep. Now that we've looked at it a second time, it could be the backyard is too small. Ceilings are too high, too low, flooring is too dirty, whatever it could be. But it doesn't have to be any legitimate, it doesn't have to be any contractual reason. They can just cancel. I hate that thing. I mean, typically, if you send it to me and you've got nothing in there, I'm gonna say, send it back and probably say, you need to put 0 in there. I think the buyer's agent should do some of this work, right, beforehand? And so should the buyer, right? How hard is it to look up sex offenders, state of Missouri? Oh, yeah. And it lights up like you'd think there's sex offenders at every corner. There's really not. You have to pull the map out a little bit.
no, they just work.
But they are out there. But I mean, I wouldn't want to sell a house to a mom and dad that had 2 little kids if there's a sex offender next door or across the street. But I think they should do some of that work.
Let me ask you a question.
Okay?
So do you think that it presents liability for an individual agent or the brokerage by the agent to searching for a registered sex offender, getting a printout of what that shows, good or bad, and having the buyer sign it or initial it. If you do it every single time,
Oh, if you do it every single time, you're probably okay. A better way to do it would be, you pull it up, you see it, maybe you print it. But you say to them, I really think you should go to greencounty.org and look under sex offenders at 123 Smith Street and see what you find.
so you think the better risk for us as an agent or brokerage would just be to encourage the buyer to do that
Especially if you know.
before they submit a contract?
Right. If I know, I'm taking my chances with the breaking the law, or because that's called tortious interference in a contract. If I steer somebody away, basically, than that. But if I know there's a sex offender across the street, if I knew that for a fact, I'm telling the buyers, there's a sex offender across the street who got, went to
Isn't
prison.
a fiduciary responsibility to look out for your buyer's best interests?
It is, but when it becomes, you're interfering in the seller's contract by doing that.
Oh, but you would want to do that before they went under contract.
Oh, if you do it before you went under contract,
Like, that's what, basically what I do every single
you
time
do?
as I'm sitting down preparing the contract. That's one of the things on my checklist is I look it up on FEMA to make sure it's not in a floodplain.
Yeah.
I pull up the house on registered sex offenders and whatever it shows, good, bad, or indifferent, I screenshot it. And then that's one of the things I have the buyer initial. And just to me as a service, if I think it's being a good agent, because if I was a buyer and I didn't think about that, but my agent did, and there's a sex offender that lives next door and that sways my decision to want to live there, which, we all know you could buy a house and, the next month a
I
registered
think
sex
it's
offender could
admirable.
move
I've never
in.
done that.
I
But
think
Never done that.
So if somebody presented me with that though, I think I would, so maybe sex offenders aren't a big deal to somebody, or the floodplain isn't a big deal to someone. I potentially could view that as steering because you've given people information based on your opinion of not liking those
I do it
things.
every single time. It's never my opinion, it's factual information. It's either in a floodplain or it's not. There's either a registered sex offender that lives next door, there's not.
But maybe I don't care about sex offenders living next door to me and that wouldn't have persuaded me to write or not write. But once you've brought that to my attention, if it swayed my opinion.
Yeah, and the other part is, remember, you're not a party to the contract, okay? So it doesn't say buyer or agent may review all the data on the subdivision. It says buyer may review.
I'm just helping them by providing the data. It would be no different than me getting the subdivision CCRs and forwarding it to the client.
Yeah.
I'm not telling them they should
I
be
know,
fine with it or shouldn't.
And
I'm
the
just.
legal people, when they changed all the contract to put all this subdivision stuff in there, they said it's not our responsibility, it's the responsibility of the buyer. And I'm thinking, oh, we can't even find it. How are they gonna find it, I mean, if you're doing that in every contract, every single one, no matter if they're 80 years old or, 25 with 2 kids, I think you're okay. But I mean, I'm telling you what I would personally, if I knew there was a sex offender across the street, I would tell my clients there's a sex offender across the street. We had get this one though. You'll like it. We gotta go on, but agent calls me last week and says, hey, we just sold this house to this guy in a certain city around the area. And he said, we're getting calls and emails and we're being burned up on Facebook. He's a guy's registered sex offender. They didn't represent him. It was their listing and he bought it unrepresented. You know what I mean? They assisted him. That's all they did.
For helping the person who was a sex offender? Is that what you're
They
saying?
didn't help. They just,
Well, but like, that's what they're getting blown
they
up
had an
about?
open house. The guy, I guess, I don't know if they had an open house. I don't know how he got there, but anyhow, they didn't represent him. They represented the seller. They sold him the house. He moves in and then everybody in the neighborhood. And I said, I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think that you have a responsibility to ask the buyer if he's a sex offender.
And if you are a sex offender, there's such a
Yeah.
wide variation of what the cause was for that.
And you're supposed to register anyway, and I think some sex offenders have to tell, I think they're required to tell that they are. I don't know if they're required to tell realtors, but definitely required to tell the police. But I said, like I said a while ago, which I don't mind saying, call the legal line, see what they say about that. And they haven't gotten back to me on that. But I've never asked anybody. I've sold a bunch of houses to single guys and single women. I've never asked them if they were a sex offender, and I've never even thought to look it up.
Well, because usually you're representing the buyer, and to me, the way I look at it, at least, if I'm representing the buyer, it's not my job to do the seller's job. It's not my job to do the listing agent's job. My job is to represent the buyer for that
What if the
buyer's
buyer
best
was a
interest.
sex offender that you were selling a house to in a neighborhood with a bunch of kids, and it was a child sex offender, because there are, like she says, there's 1,000 difference. I mean, hell, when I went to school, when I was younger, I mean, I messed around, what's the proper word? Dated a bunch of 15, 16, 17-year-olds that I mean, I would have been in jail because I was probably at least 19. Yeah. My point is that, I mean, that's illegal, right? When I was growing up, you weren't supposed to have a girl in the car with her shoes off. Did you know that one? That was a law in Missouri for a long time. I always made them keep their shoes on.
But, oh my God.
Moving on.
Hey, Jim, but if I'm representing a buyer.
Yeah.
And that buyer is a registered sex offender,
Uh-huh.
either if I'm not fine with it as a buyer's agent, then I should have never agreed to accept that person as a client.
How would you know that?
Well,
It's-
Nate
it's
looks it
public. No, I mean, I don't, but maybe, if you're a buyer's agent and you have an issue and you don't want to represent a registered sex offender, then maybe as you're getting a client, before you agree to enter in a exclusive arrangement with them, then maybe you should look it up to see whether a registered sex offender. But
What's really interesting, I get you, but I mean, what's really interesting is so many buyers agents now. I mean, they get on, what do you call that stuff?
4-1.
Yeah, I mean, they're looking at if they get a call from a buyer, they're looking them up left and right to see if what the issue is and whether they're legitimate or legal. So you're probably gonna be okay. But, I mean, if you do it for the one, why wouldn't you do it for the other?
But because it's, to me, if I'm the buyer's agent for you, I'm looking out for your best interest. And if you're a registered sex offender, it's not in your best interest to live anywhere that you're legally able to live. And again, I hadn't even thought about it from being a buyer's agent for a registered sex offender.
Yeah, you gotta turn it.
As far as I know, I've never thought about it, but the flip side of it is though, if I'm representing a buyer, I'm looking out for their best interest, and if the next door neighbor is a sex offender, I think they should know that. If I was buying a house and you were my agent and you were aware of that, I would want you to tell me. Even if my kids are grown, I may still not want to live next to
I
you.
tell my clients if you have concerns about that, you need to do the research. You can go to the State Highway Patrol, you can go to the city of Nixa, you can go to the city of Willard, whatever it is. You can find a list of sex offenders. It's not that hard. I do the same thing with the data. Unless they ask me specific questions about the data, I'm not doing it because I expect the title company to find some of that information. Now, what we've been finding out lately is why they added all this subdivision stuff in there in different parts is because the HOAs sometimes haven't been paying their dues or their bills for a long time, and now there's liens against the property. That's why that's all been added in the last year. All right, we got to go on. So who can do the inspection? The buyer or anybody the buyer selects. And then you have a certain time period to provide an inspection notice. And I always put 15 days. And just like she was talking about on a 20-day contract, not very helpful for the seller, but at the same time, I think you need that amount of time just in case you can't get an inspector, number one. Number two, your buyer is analytical or just lazy, and you can't get all you can't get the responses you need to fill out an inspection notice. So I want 15 days, and then to get the additional 5 days, all you gotta do is put it in writing. You don't have to have a specialist. It mentions specialist, but put it in writing, 5 days. I need additional 5 days for the inspections. That's all I do. So I know I can have at least 20 days. And it's really important sometimes because the buyer is responsible for all inspections. That's nothing. I've had a lot of agents to say, well, I sent it over and told the seller to inspect the roof. I mean, that's not what you want to do. Or I told the seller to get an inspector to inspect the foundation. That's not what you want to do. You want the buyer to do that. Buyer needs to be responsible for that, pay for that, and then the reports belong to him. All right, so we do an inspection, and I could pull one up for you, but we have time constraints always. We prepare the inspection notice. Now, how do you do that? And here's the way I suggest it. You can do it any way you want to. As soon as that inspection report comes in, I send it to the other agent. I send it to the listing agent. My buyer's already got it, got a copy of it. I want the other agent to see the entire inspection report, every single page of it, so that she can see or he can see the same thing I'm looking at. Then I go through the report and I print it because I'm old. But I want to go through it and page back and forth and look and page back and forth. And then I call my buyer and I say, hey, look, so I've gone through this a couple of times. What are you thinking, that we need to ask the seller to repair? And they typically have some ideas and we talk about it. And I say, I tell you what I'll do. I'll put it in an email, just a list of things, and I'll write it the way that we need to ask for it. And I typically say, seller to have qualified contractor repair or replace. Seller to have qualified contractor repair or replace. Unless it's a bad electrical issue or a super duper plumbing issue, I'm not gonna ask for an electrician to replace a switch on the wall or a GFCI. Qualified contractors can do it all day. You got a leak under a sink and the guy's done that infrared stuff and it's a leak right at the collar. Qualified contractor can fix that. The homeowner probably can fix it. So unless it's something big, I just say qualified contractor. Now, if an inspection comes back and it says, we've got some roof issues here and it may need, a third party to look at it. I'm calling that roofer that night or that minute. I'm getting them over as quick as possible so we can have a full roof report I can attach. Okay? Same thing with plumbing, foundation, whatever. You can't ask the seller to inspect the foundation because he could have you or me come over and inspect the foundation. And what's your qualifications? Well, I poured concrete when I was a child, and I know all about concrete. So, is that enough qualification? It's not specific, is it? So, you need to get a specialist, then it's the buyer's responsibility, not the seller's. And then we send over that inspection notice and we've got our 10 items on there. And now the seller has 10 days to review. I'm not sending over portions of the inspection report. Number one, it's tedious and it's hard if you're old to do that. Separate page 37 and page 64. I'm sending the whole damn report over. Here it is. Here's all 60 pages. Mr. Seller, this agent's already got a copy. And here's what we're asking for. And there was 60 pages, so there's probably 50 items we could have asked for legally for the contract, but we only want 10. And I'm hoping what? They sign it and we're done. That's what you want. However, within the 10-day resolution period, if they don't sign it and they counter back, I ask for 10, they agree to 5. My buyer has the right to either sign that and accept it, and now we move forward to closing. Or my buyer has the right to counter his counter, right? Yes, everybody?
Yes.
I just want to make sure you're still with me. So he counters back. So I asked for 10, he said 5, I sent back 7, now he signs it. Now we're going to closing. But it has to be done within that 10-day resolution period by midnight, or the contract terminates automatically. It doesn't terminate maybe, It doesn't terminate just in case, it terminates automatically at midnight if you don't have 2 signatures on the inspection notice. Okay? Now they go on to talk about this capitulation period. Really, that only should apply if the seller says, I'm not fixing anything. And then the buyer can within 48 hours say, okay, I'm capitulating and moving forward, buying the house as is, or I'm terminating the contract without penalty. I get that question all the time, but it's really only if the seller says, I'm not fixing anything. Because any other way, if he counters back and says, I'm doing one of the 10 items, you could just let it terminate on its own.
So capitulation has to happen in the 10-day window? Or if they say, I'm just not fixing anything?
Well, they could wait till the end of the 10-day window, right, to say that they weren't fixing anything.
Yeah, they could wait, but if they do that, if they send it over and they're not fixing anything, you still don't have 2 signatures on the inspection notice, so it terminates at the end of the 10-day window anyway. Really, the idea is behind the capitulation notice is the seller goes, sees it as soon as it gets sent over. Let's say he responds in 48 hours, but he responds, I'm not fixing anything. Then the contract can be terminated is the idea, and they can move back on the market and keep trying to market the property. Or
After
the buyer,
that 2-day capitulation period.
with whatever the buyer decides. Either the buyer terminates or the buyer says, I'll accept it as is.
So what if a scenario where you request 10 things, the seller comes back and says, I'll fix 5 things. And the buyer says, no, not fine with that. I want all 10 things. And then the seller says, well, sorry, just it is what it is, 5 days or nothing. The buyer doesn't retain that right to capitulate since the, yeah? So how could the buyer save that transaction then if they
Sign what he agrees to.
sign the 5-day
Or the
agreement
five
within
items.
that 10-day
Gotta be
resolution?
within the 10 days.
Okay.
And I've had that before a bunch of times where people have said, you know, we'll agree to sign it. Say, well, when did the resolution period end? 2 days ago? He said, you don't even have a contract. It's gone. That doesn't exist anymore. Now, could you revive it with an amendment? You sure could. All parties agree that the resolution period has been extended through the 29th, if that's today, and sellers and buyers agreed to the 5 items to be repaired. I mean, you could revive it, but once you get to that midnight, that's why I think that should be in capital letters and bold and all that, that it's dead once it's over there. Now, I want to go back because there's an important thing here. On, once we send over this one inspection notice, that's all you get. The inspection notice on line 171 shall state, 1, buyer is satisfied with all inspections, doesn't happen very often. 2, they're in unacceptable conditions, be satisfied by seller in a workmanlike manner. It doesn't say by specialist or anything. Prior to the scheduled closing date. Or 3, buyer elects to terminate the contract with earnest money returned to buyer subject to paragraph 8. So, wait a minute. So we've gone 20 days into the contract now, and the buyer's terminating the contract? Unless you encourage your buyer or suggest to your buyer or counsel your buyer to check 177. Right? Because if they check 177, it says, look, I'm going to give the seller an opportunity to make repairs, or at least to consider making repairs. And I really think, look, you want to have a fair and balanced contract? That's a fair and balanced contract. Buyer wanted to buy, seller wants to sell. Uh-oh, we had an inspection, there's some issues. Seller should have an opportunity to fix those issues for the buyer to the buyer's satisfaction. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody's good with that? We already talked about the resolution period. Now we speed up really fast and we'll be out here in no time. F, we don't have government inspections.
In our area.
Nixa has them on multifamily when it's the vacant or the tenants move out. I think. Lebanon has it, $50. Every transaction that closes, they get inspected by somebody from the city. That's pretty cool. G, home warranty. Either you have a home warranty or you don't. In this case, the seller's not providing a home warranty. But, I mean, if the market continues to get, we get some inventory, you should ask for a home warranty. They can always say no. Now, if you're in a multiple offer situation, not too good because they're getting expensive now, just like everything else. They're $600 or $700. Or 2, seller agrees to pay. Or 3, seller already has a home warranty on the house and it gets transferred to the buyer at closing, which is good. If they add that, you want a copy of that and a contract number. I told you about the disposition of earnest money, so we can skip basically, if you don't get a signed mutual release signed by both parties, it's really a struggle to get it out. It just really is a struggle. Title companies won't do it because it's, they'd be liable for it. Brokers can make the decision after 60 days, right? I'm not doing that, giving somebody's $15,000 to somebody else, not me. So it's staying in the escrow account until they get something signed.
So Jim, as a practical matter, if you're representing a buyer and you already mentioned that you're not offering it up front, but then the seller comes back and says they want $1,000 of earnest money. What I've been doing at that point is counseling my buyers with the risks to them and basically explaining that yeah, theoretically, all these different ways you would get your earnest money back, but there's some level of risk because if they won't agree to it, then the title company holds it, it goes back to the state and you're not getting it. I always tell someone that, just trying to be a good agent, because I don't want, if that does happen, I don't want them furious at me saying, well, you told me that if we backed out because of inspections, then I'd get my money
The thing
back.
is, we always have to remember that the buyer really wants to buy. They wouldn't have sat down and filled out 27, 28 pages if they didn't want to buy. So I counsel them, but I'm counseling them lightly. I'm saying, that's why we don't probably put it down in the first place. But if they get a request for it and they really want the property, I'm saying, let's send it over, give them a check and we'll get it done. But I want you to read paragraph 8 is what I will tell them. I want you to read it rather than going through the whole speech again. But I agree, that's good. I think that's good counseling. On 9, we really got to read this today, don't we? Right? Loss and condemnation. It happens, doesn't it? In the Ozarks, how many tornadoes? 26 or something like that over the last.
Quite a few.
There was 26 tornadoes around the area. Every county, we all got lucky. But Rogers, Arkansas, and Bentonville got ripped, man, pretty good. Texas got wiped out yesterday in a couple spots. So it does happen, and this is what this paragraph 4 is. It just says, look, if a loss occurs, you can have 2 choices as a buyer. You can have them rebuild the property into its current condition and you can continue to close, or you can terminate the contract without penalty. Not only tornadoes, could be an earthquake. We sit on a fault.
Is that only in the case of a total loss, or would that be the roof got hail damage, so now the buyer can get out?
Hail damage, probably not, because the insurance company's going to produce. No, that wouldn't be, that would be, I don't think that's a significant loss. No.
So if the house burned down.
Yeah, and that happens too. We've had that happen. A few years back, we had a tornado on Battlefield and market was pretty strong. They were just now building up Battlefield and we had some houses that were gone and we had some that were busted up. And some people continued, stayed in their contract and got it re-inspected once it was completed.
Get a new house for the old house price.
Yeah, exactly. You ever see that film with Robin Williams? The World According to Garp, maybe you said it? Oh, it's old. This is as old as I am almost. Anyhow, he's looking at a house. He's going to buy it. He's standing in the front yard. And anyhow, this airplane flies in, runs right into the house. Doesn't catch fire or anything. It's just a little plane. And they both fall to the ground. Holy, what was that? And the realtor stands up and he goes, well, I guess that we're done with that, aren't we? He goes, heck no, I'm buying it. What's the chances of that ever happening again? Well, there was a place down in Highlandville, I think. They got hit by tornadoes 3 years in a row, same farm. you take, is it HH, it goes across and hooks up with 160 going south? Anyhow, there's this farm in the Crook, I think it's HH.
Just one H.
Anyhow, it's a horse farm, and they got hit 3 years in a row.
Yikes, I wouldn't get, I
I'd
wouldn't
be
be within a
moving.
mile of that
I'll be
property.
gone.
Yeah.
All right, now get this, 253 all the way down to 285, so we flip pages again. These are all about concessions. Remember all that stuff you did in school where they made you plus this and minus that and divide this and all that? You don't do any of that. The title company does it all. Probably the most significant thing in there for you is if there's on-site fuel, which is propane, your buyer has to pay for that at closing. And if you represent the seller, you have to tell the buyer's agent that the buyer has to pay for it. The rest of it, if you'll look at line 284, all as approved by buyer's lender. So all this stuff, doesn't matter what it is. So if you put $10,000 in concessions, how much is the lender gonna try to take? 10,000. They might not get it all. I've had some where they, only take 80% of it. That's all they can do per VA or FHA or something like that. But they're gonna try to take it all and they can use anything in here to get it. Any cost associated with the loan or anything there might be. The key is what? Who gets to decide how much is taken?
The lender.
The lender. And then the other part of that, just a piece, is the title company. Title company says, we got these fees too. Have you noticed that those have increased? The title company fees? Quite a bit. They've been paying attention to the news. But that's the key to that, huh?
Question,
Okay.
but not to include the cost of any home warranty.
No, they can't pay, out of concessions, you can't pay home warranty. You
So
can't
that is
pay
a
buyer's
total,
agent
okay.
fees.
So
you
when
can't-
when you've agreed, negotiated, they pay for that, and then if you've got concessions, they also pay for the concessions.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's separate.
yeah,
So the seller's fees, title fees are separate, the seller paying for a home warranty is separate. The seller paying any admin fees or whatever you call them.
transaction
For
fees.
the agent, that's separate. And then there's the concessions. They all fit in this box. Same thing on the buyer's side. There might be all kinds of concessions, but you can't pay any buyer's agent fees that are on there. But you've heard recently that they're talking about you could add agent fees and concessions. I think you'll see some of that in the new contract. Look, the new contract doesn't exist yet. All right, that's why it said do not copy all over it, the copy that I gave you. They just wanted the brokers to see it, but I mean, I think you guys need to be a step ahead of it at least. But I think there's allowing some concessions for the agents so that a seller can pay some buyer's agent commissions.
Yeah, it's redlined in there.
No, I think one option there real quick before we go on. Let's say you represent the buyer, and you tell the buyer can't pay 3%. Most of the time. I mean, it's gonna be tough, right? An additional 3% above the purchase price, that's a lot of money. But you tell the buyer, you say, look, you agree to pay me 1%, and I'll get the rest of my fees from the seller. Okay? And then I just write it in the contract, seller to pay 2%. And so the seller thinks he's getting a discount, but the buyer is actually participating.
I think the NAR settlement specifically said something to the effect of that a buyer's agent cannot get more commission than is initially agreed by the buyer in the exclusive representation agreement. And I may be wrong, because
Well, I could put 3 in there and still get in, tell them, I'd have in the special agreements, I'll agree to accept 1% from you, and then if I can get the other 2%, I'll get it from the seller.
Yes and yes. I know that one.
This is a binding contract, that we're on paragraph 11 there, and it is a binding contract, you need to understand that.
Are there a lot of sellers that don't wanna pay that 3%?
Yes,
Not yet.
beginning in July and August, there may be a lot, because they'll be counseled by people not to pay it, which is sad. But it's traditionally, we tell our clients, that's why I started that, I'm not gonna change my presentation, the commission is 6%, if you wanna hire me, we're gonna cooperate, split that fee with the buyer's agent if they come as a buyer's agent. And then I've always said, you can say what you want, if I represent both parties or I assist the buyer, I'll take 5%. I put it in every one of mine. I don't care. Hell, if I can get 5%, that's a good deal for me, and I'd rather do it anyway. I don't have to mess with the other agent. But a group of buyers got contacted by attorneys and they sued the NAR, Keller Williams, Remax, Caldwell Banker, Home Service. Anyhow, they sued and said, hey, you know what? You've been making the buyers overpay for all these years, you know? You're punishing the buyers because, or the sellers, because the sellers is paying the buyer's commission, and that shouldn't be. So the sellers, you know, you've been really hurting them. So basically, a group of people in Kansas City, the jury in Kansas City said, yeah, you're right. So, you know, we need to change all this. Right now, if you go on the MLS, you can scroll down to the bottom, it says you get 3% if you sell that house. Starting in July or August, that's going away. You won't be able to see anything. So your first call, if you're gonna show property, is there cooperating fee? It's gonna be a little bit of learning curve, but you're new, so it's better doing it now than it is for all of us old people who are just used to getting paid. Anyhow, binding contract, I mean, this is just contract law. If we get two signatures, it's a binding contract. Is it assignable? Yeah, I could assign a contract to you with a simple amendment. It just says the buyer is now, and all parties agree, and that's the end of it. That's all you gotta do on an amendment. You don't have to explain why you're doing it or anything. It's just we got a different buyer.
But everyone has to agree to it.
Yeah, the current buyer has to sign, the new buyer has to sign, and the sellers have to sign, but they can't withhold it as long as the buyer, the new buyer, is doing whatever was in the original contract, the terms and conditions, or better.
So they cannot deny that?
Can't deny it, can't withhold it.
The seller can't say no, you're saying.
Can't say no unless, let's say, I'm getting a conventional loan and I sign it and he gets an FHA loan. Now I've changed the terms and conditions, so the seller would have to agree to that.
But if the terms were, you're paying cash, and you decide you don't want to buy it, and I'm like, Jim, let me buy it.
Yeah.
Then the seller has to agree to sell it to
Yep.
me, as long as I'm gonna be on the same.
And I've
terms.
done that a dozen times in my career.
What are scenarios where that would happen? Like, I've had it where
Well, let's say you
someone
work at
decides
Jack
to
Henry.
buy it in their LLC or
Yeah.
in a trust or whatever.
Yeah, that's
What are
the-
other scenarios?
Well, let's say I work at Jack Henry and there's 100 or 200 cubicles in there, you know? And they buy a company in North Dakota and say, hey, Jim, we're transferring you. Oh, man, I'm under contract in the house. We don't care. If you're being transferred out of here, either that or you don't have a job, one or the other. So the guy in the cubicle next to me goes, so what's gonna happen to your house? You go, I don't know what we're gonna do, because I'm still under contract to buy it, whether I live in North Dakota or here. And he goes, well, I'll buy it. There's an assignment. It's more common, what happens is, for example, a kid was trying to buy a house, a young guy was trying to buy a house, and all of a sudden he can't qualify. And then he adds his mom, or the mom becomes the buyer, or the dad. But I've used it 3 times since I've been in Springfield to buy houses for people of prominence, or properties, that the seller wouldn't sell it to them, but they'll sell it to me. Myers, a guy at the radio station, wanted to buy a winery, grape farm down there in Mount Vernon. They wouldn't sell it to him. They didn't like him. He's kind of a not nice guy. Anyhow, I bought it. And then the day before closing, I signed it over to him.
How well did that go over?
There's nothing illegal about
Do
it.
it quite a bit.
Huh?
We do it for
Yeah.
those reasons pretty
Yeah.
often.
O'Reilly's, they can't buy anything because every time they put their name on a contract, the price goes up. When I was in Branson, we sold 2 properties, Silver Dollar City the Herschel family. We didn't have a, well, we did know because we knew, but we didn't have a clue it was the Herschels. They never said Herschels on a contract. It didn't say Silver Dollar City or Hillbilly Entertainment or something like that. It's just some random name out of the blue. And then it got assigned right before closing. I don't care, but some people do. 1031 exchanges typically done with commercial. I have never liked the fact that you have to pay capital gains when you improve a property. But this was developed by a guy named Stocker, and it's called a Stocker exchange. And all it does is push your tax responsibility forward. But let's say I buy a duplex for 100, I clean it up, fix it up, rent it real good. Now I sell it for 200. My basis on that property is 100,000. You know, we're not talking about improvements or anything. So now my capital gains are gonna be on that $100,000 unless I buy something else of equal or greater value. So 100,000, that's 21% tax in the state of Missouri currently. And if Biden had his way, and I'm not being political, anyhow, he wanted to raise it to 50% capital gains tax. So, but 21's enough. That's 21,000 of the 100,000 that I worked hard to fix up. So if you want to avoid that, what you do then is I take this money and it's called a like-kind exchange, but it just means an investment property and I'm buying a different investment property. So I might sell a duplex and buy a restaurant, or I might sell a duplex and buy an apartment complex, or I might sell a duplex and buy a farm, because farms are investment properties, kind of. You know, if you grow hay on it or you put a cow on there, it's an investment property. And that pushes that tax issue into the future until I sell that property again. Now, if I die, my kids inherit it.
Step up in basis.
It could go away because it'd be the basis on what I bought it for, which would be a good deal for them. The lawyers will tell you the contract is the 8 pages of the contract, the 4 corners of the contract. That's a lie. If you ever get in litigation, they want every page of everything that you've ever initialed or attached to the contract. So that's the entire agreement, okay? On default remedies, look, it's the same thing on the seller and the buyer. The short end is this. We're on the next page, I think. If the seller defaults, the buyer can file litigation for specific performance, which means you have to buy the house. That's what specific performance means. And they could get their fees too. Or if the seller defaults, the buyer could not sue, but could claim damages. What would his damages be? Well, I had to move out of my house and I had to rent for 6 months and I had all these expenses and all that. Those are real damages that can be claimed. And then 3 is the one that I have, my favorite, any remedy under the law. What does that mean? Anything.
Anything the lawyers can.
Yeah, not just specific performance. I mean, first thing you should do is go to Eustasis and tell them you got depression or anxiety or something. You know, Eustasis down around National, now that place, psychology place. Go in there and, I mean, run up a big bill. Guess what? On the buyer defaults, it's exactly the same thing. They just change the word from buyer to seller. So when a buyer even mentions to you as an agent that I'm thinking about not closing, I tell them it's a bad idea. Let me give you some different options. Because if you look at that default paragraph, Mr. Buyer, none of those options are good. We're already through inspections. You've already got your loan. Why don't we just close? And you don't have to move into it, but I'll sell it again for you for free. Keller Williams won't charge you a penny except for the fee that we have to pay a buyer's agent. Nothing on the sell side. And it's got a new roof, so we can probably raise the price 3% and maybe get that, and you won't be out anything. But worst case scenario, you know, you might lose some money, but you're not gonna lose a lot. But I guarantee you, if we have litigation, you have litigation, if the seller sues you for default, it's going to cost you more money and cause you more stress than you could ever imagine. And it'll go on for a long time. We had a buyer, our seller defaulted last year in our company. Not me. another agent in our company, defaulted. Buyer wanted to buy, the seller wouldn't sell because the house that he wanted was gone or something like that. The buyer sued him. I think it was 16 months later, the buyer wins and the seller has to move out of his house and pay all the attorney fees for the buyer and damages. Cost you a ton because the seller defaulted. I'd never seen that one before. I've seen the buyer default and get sued by builders and things like that. And they almost saw the seller almost always wins when they sue the buyer. But I've never seen a buyer sue a seller. That was pretty good.
But the seller got forced to sell the house.
Yeah, he had to move out.
Should have realized that early in before he got racked up all these,
Well, you
attorney
never know
expenses.
because it's a jury trial. And jury trials are like this, you know? I mean, you never know what somebody's gonna
But
decide.
doesn't it specifically say in there about the seller defaulting that the buyer can sue for to
Specific
force them
performance.
for performance
Oh, yeah.
to that?
Yeah, but I think what the seller thought was the buyer would never go to that trouble. And look, if you ever mess with people or if you're selling property to people with money, trust me, they don't care. If they've got money and they've got lots of money, they'll just sue you and kind of for the fun of it, you know? I mean, I think they want.
Or defend it even though they think they're gonna lose because they get stuck.
Yeah,
in
they'll take the
principle.
chance of losing, where a lot of us, like me, I don't have a lot of money to throw around. I'm not gonna sue anybody. I mean, it's gonna be hard, I'm gonna be hard pressed because I don't wanna have to spend 10 or 15, 20, $30,000 to see if I'm gonna win. I might just take my lumps and go on, you know? All right, on seller's disclosure statement. Buyer confirmed before signing that they signed a disclosure statement, even if it doesn't say anything, because look at B, and this is the one agents don't realize. Seller agrees to provide buyer with the seller's disclosure statement within blank number of days, 1 if none stated, and then the buyer has 3 days to review it and then can terminate the contract. How would you like to explain that to your seller? Oh, I forgot to scan the disclosure statement, and so now he's reviewing it, and he's gonna terminate the contract.
Oops.
That'd be a bad one now. I've never had that happen, but I have failed to put disclosure statements up before, and somebody will call me and say, hey, do you have a disclosure statement for that property? I'm like, I mean, the machine's just right down there. You know, I could walk down the hall and scan, but it happens, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Now, the board has made lead-based paint go up, you can't even get the listing on, so that works good, but you can get it on without the disclosures.
We just had it happen with the e-sign, like it all got filled out except for the part that needs filled out.
Yeah.
And so we had it up this whole time under contract, a couple of days from closing, and they were like, oh, we actually looked back and we signed them. And you signed them, but there's nothing filled out. There's no mark, you know, sometimes I have to mark through it and say no
Something.
disclosures or whatever, but it just didn't, for whatever DocuSign didn't capture it. And so,
I feel better about that than not putting it up and getting canceled. God, I just can't even imagine how that would feel. You got 1 day to get it to them, so you send it over, and then they have 3 days to review, and like the 11th hour, like they did on you, they terminate the contract.
it's actually the same contract, so we're all just out of a.
Oh, I would hate to make that phone call. That might be,
In that case, like say you forgot to upload it and you get a contract from a buyer, you're the listing agent, and you say, oh crap, they got this checked because I didn't have it. Couldn't you just pause, send it over to them and say, hey, you know, here it is, adjust your contract.
yeah, you
that
could.
They have them review it, adjust it, that they've reviewed it.
so much we do is electronic now, you could do that. A lot of times I've already sent the contract to the seller, you know? All right, and then C, no seller's disclosure statement will be provided by the seller. I know, but in the state of Missouri, you don't have to have a disclosure. According to the attorneys, the last broker meeting we had, and both attorneys were there from the state, you don't even have to fill out those things that are required by statute. That's what they told us. I know, and it says by law you have to. They said you don't even have to do that. The seller refuses, they just refuse.
So if I'm a buyer and the seller doesn't provide a seller's disclosure, I don't have to go through with the
Yes, you should. If you're right, depends on what stage you're at. So you go onto the listing, there's no seller's disclosure, okay? And then your buyer still wants to buy the house, and you tell them there's no seller's disclosure. So the thing to do would be what there? You write into the offer that it's contingent on inspection, satisfactory inspection. I mean, that'd be the best way. Or you check the box and say that I want a disclosure statement. And here's the deal, like some sellers just make no disclosures. They fill out the basic stuff and they say, I'm not making any further disclosures. So you're really dependent on the inspection anyway. I encourage my clients to always fill it all out. And I think the ones that are really crazy are the ones that flip houses or remodel houses and they don't make any disclosures. They stripped it down to the studs, put in new insulation and wiring and plumbing, all new fixtures, new ceilings, painted the house, painted the exterior, made all the repairs and put on a new roof and they make no disclosures. Does that make sense?
They know more about that house.
I know it, the most
than most
homeowners.
sellers that.
Like I had
10 years.
I've been in the door of my crawl space a couple times in the last year, but I haven't crawled the crawl space. But these guys are typically, they're everywhere, you know? So your question was, do you have to make an offer? Is that the question?
I guess it's like, if you, I don't know what I'm asking.
Well, should you make an offer? I mean, if you want to protect your buyer, you could make it contingent. You could put in special agreements on the offer. The offer is contingent on a satisfactory inspection report results, after, through buyer's inspections or whatever, or contract will be terminated. Or you could just ask the agent, you know, you don't have any disclosures here. We'd like a copy of the disclosures. And if they say my seller's not making any disclosures, then you have to be cautious. You gotta be worried.
Too, depending on, as a buyer's agent, depending on who your client is, so if it's depending on who they are, what, you know, if they're a 20-year, I'm just not categorizing anybody, but
Sounds
if
like
they're-
you are.
well, I'm
Spring.
okay, I will then. So if it's somebody who is, I'm sorry, I'll rephrase that then.
Experienced.
If it's someone who's experienced and it's not gonna be a hardship on them to move in the house and then have a discovery, then that's a conversation. But if it's someone who you know potentially could get in the home and then they don't have the ability or the funds to close or to make a repair, then that's a different conversation.
It really is. Like if I was buying a house and they said, I'm not making any disclosures, I probably would have looked at it already, you know, and I would have said, you know, here's what I see. I think I can fix this. Now, I bought a house for my daughter and I did exactly that. We bought it as is. And guess what? I replaced every pipe under the floor, all the old piping. It cost us $7,000. But it was, you know, it was me, you know, I did it.
Your dad of the year.
Yeah.
Yes. Lead-based paint disclosure, it's already on the MLS. Yeah, you're never hardly ever gonna see anybody, I haven't seen anybody ever disclose lead-based paint, but you have to fill out the document saying you don't have any. Number 17, you've gotta have the utilities on for a walkthrough. And when we wanna do a walkthrough with your clients, we kind of talked about it, I don't think this was earlier, or maybe upstairs. It'd be great to do a walkthrough 3 days or 4 days before closing. The house is completely vacant and clean. Doesn't happen that often. But maybe your clients are only available to see it when it's still occupied. And if they do, I still just suggest to the agent, the day of closing, if it's a house you can get to, go do a walkthrough real quick and just make sure there's nothing that's just obviously been damaged in the moving process or hidden. The superintendent of schools, we sold his house years ago, Chris and Holly Stenger, who's over at Murning House, sold it, co-listed it. And he moves out and goes down to the lake, and in his dining room, it had a round rug on the floor. And he had I think it's either brown or white, I can't remember. Anyhow, when he took the round rug and the round table out of there, there's this big circle. I mean, it's 3 shades different in color. Buyer does a walkthrough, says, hey, I'm not accepting that. We call him and said, hey, you had to have seen that when you moved that, you know? The buyer's not gonna accept that. He goes, I don't care. I'm not paying another penny. So my wife and Holly pitched in, it was 12 by 12 or 14 by 12 room, so it wasn't horribly expensive. Point is, that's the kind of things you see. Our fireplaces, they've got a rug down, and they pull the rug up, and here's that hole where the fireplace. Those are the kind of things you see in walkthroughs, but the utilities have to be on per the contract, even if it's foreclosure. It's
Jim,
supposed
do
to be
you
on.
think that that puts, if you do the final walkthrough as an agent without the buyer being there, do you think that puts liability on the buyer's agent? Because,
Sure does.
yeah, but I mean, what if I don't see something that they would have seen and now they're mad at me because I'm the one that did the
Do
final
video.
walkthrough?
Yeah, you guys are all
Yeah,
into the video stuff. You just video everything, so here it is. You guys look at it, what do you think?
yeah, that's.
Or do FaceTime,
Probably
whatever you
best
call
way
it,
to
is
do
that
it,
what you call it, FaceTime?
So what
Do
if,
FaceTime,
what if there's something that is wrong the day of closing?
okay, right here.
Hold up closing.
So,
Yeah.
right here,
Threaten them to not close.
this is whatever it is, there's something wrong. Water leak, gotta act quick on that. Let's say something, hole in the wall. Shoot the photo, or have you do it, shoot the photo, text it to the other agent, text the agent, say, we've got a problem, there's a hole in the wall that wasn't here when we wrote the offer. You know, we either need compensation or the repair made prior to closing. Or we may not be closing. And then you call the agent and say, hey, I just sent you a text. Did you get it? Do you see that picture? And then you email the agent and say, here's a copy of the picture I just sent you. I mean, you just rail on them until you get it, you want to get it done. It's typically going to be compensation at
It
closing.
was behind the couch and they didn't see it until the couch was moved when they were moving out.
Yeah, same thing. Oh, is that what they said?
Well, I'm just saying that's what,
Doesn't matter. Here's a picture, Mr. Seller. Fix it. Kind of like the superintendent, which I reminded me of that because what a horse poop. You know, here's a guy making $250,000 and he won't replace a carpet.
So do you have to rewrite the contract or?
No, but you'd use an amendment. I mean, you just have to decide what that number is, or you can make an agreement, the escrow X. So let's say there's a hole in the drywall, it's pretty good size. So I'm thinking that's what, $500. And so I say, all parties agree that $500 will be escrowed at closing to repair the drywall hole in the living room. And will be held by Legal Land and Title or Hogan Land and Title, or whoever it might be. But you never hesitate. I mean, as soon as you see it, if it's something that you know, especially if your buyers are with you and they go, holy, you know, then you know it's something that's wrong.
Would you then have your seller sign a release so that they can't come after them for more money?
No,
No? So like if it's me and
you're
you,
closed.
no, we haven't closed yet.
Money's exchanged hands. Money's going into escrow for that repair only.
But now they get somebody out there and it's an $800 fix and they come after you.
We've agreed on 500.
So since it's closed, it's in writing, you're solid, your people are fine.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
you've taken a guess.
Which is a good point though for the buyer though, is you need to tell them that, say, listen, we're thinking that $500 will cover it. If it ends
Yeah.
up being 800, all you got's 500 and now you're already closed.
Because of
Yeah.
course, they always want to go back after the seller. So that's where I'm like, do we have to do something to protect the seller or is it because
Once
this
it's
is how it
signed, it's
was?
signed, so you'd be good, but, I mean, I probably underestimate things, because it looks to me like it's an easy fix. But then you get the contractor out and he goes, oh, no, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. I'll have to use my special tools and all that, so it's gonna be 1,000. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think you're right. So we should put 1,000 in there. So I'm not gonna send that amendment, Mr. Buyer and Mrs. Buyer. I've been counseled by someone who knows better. So we're gonna put $1,000 in there for repairs. And you could return anything not used to make the repair to the sellers if you wanted to. I doubt if you will.
I bet once that contractor realizes that there's 1,000 escrow.
Oh, he's gonna figure it out.
It's gonna be $1,000.
1,200 then. All right, on signatures, just know this, you can sign it anyway, electronic, you can sign it wet, you can fax it. I mean, do anything. That's all that's saying. It goes into a lot of stuff. That's what it means. Seller can be more than one person, buyer could be more than one person, they could be just one person. But we're getting the baby boomers are dying, we got all these kids, so you'll have 8 people on the side, on a contract sometimes. Notices, don't do anything unless it's in writing. Don't do anything unless it's in writing, paragraph 20. And this is really important because, all right, so I get this sign and I scan it and I push send and it goes. It doesn't say it was come back. It's been received. Okay? So when I send it, it is then legal upon receipt. If it doesn't come back to me, it's been received, whether you see it tonight or tomorrow or the next day, it's been received by you. Now it's your responsibility, whatever client you're representing.
I'm just trying to think of an instance when that would.
Well, here's what happens. It was, Tammy Tucker up on the north side, good agent, been in business 30 years, family's been in business for 60. She writes an offer on one of Dan Holt's listings about 5 years ago and sends it to him. They counter. And she calls Dan and says, hey, this is great. I'm gonna get it signed. I'll get it back to you. It's on a Saturday. So she goes to lunch with her kids, family, and then she goes to dinner with her parents. And then the next morning she gets up, and she goes to church every Sunday. Goes out to lunch. And then she sends it at 2:00 after she gets done with church and lunch and all that stuff. Sends it to Dan, sends a counter. And Dan calls her and says, I'm sorry, we accepted another offer. And she goes, you can't do that. Look at the signature. It was dated yesterday at 1:00 when you called me, when I called you. It's not valid until receipt. It doesn't even exist. She could have it signed 10 times. When I first got into business, people used to pull that all the time. I would call and say, hey, look, sorry, but I've got another offer. Oh, well, we've got a signed counter right here. It was signed 3 hours ago, and they sent it up. That's why they added that. It is valid upon receipt. So you can't sneak one by anybody anymore. Like I tell them, worst case scenario, shoot a picture of that counter and send it to them. Is that valid upon receipt? Yes, it's valid. But she was still mad. She said we were illegal and she called the MREC and she called the legal line up there and all that. They told her, sorry, but she thought she was right. She just said that Dan was doing, practicing illegally.
Did she tell Dan that it was signed?
Yeah, doesn't matter. Yeah, she said, I've got it signed.
Why would you do that though? If you're Dan, why would you do that? Why would you
Do
sell
what?
her down the river when you knew that the buyer signed the?
You don't have anything. It doesn't exist. You have to understand that. Until it's in my hands or in my machine or in my phone, it does not exist. I don't care what you tell me.
Well, we get probably 5 or 10 calls a day saying, hey, we just went and looked at this and we're writing a full price offer. My people are ready to go. And
Yeah,
we've got it. Husband's just the
Nothing
only
ever happens,
person to sign it. And
And it sounds
then,
like it wasn't signed yet. It was still verbal, right?
yeah.
It's still verbal at the point when.
Verbal
she
doesn't
told
matter.
Dan.
they teach you that in real estate school, that verbal contract. No, doesn't mean anything. That contract says that the notice is valid upon receipt for a reason. For that same reason I just gave you and the same reason she gave you. I had people that were just back in the day before there were electronic means like this, before email, other than AOL. They would say, I would call them and say, I got another offer. And they go, wait a minute, we've already signed this. Yeah, they just sit there and sign it right there at their desk. How did I know? And then they'd send it over and I was. So that's the reason for that.
And then any party can rescind an offer until they're aware that the other people have signed it or I guess actually that they've received that it's been signed in return, right? I guess what I'm saying is, like, say I'm representing a buyer and you're the listing agent and you send me a counter offer and then you decide you can rescind it until the
Prior to
point
signature.
it's signed and you have it back.
Yeah. Anytime prior to signature, even if you say I've signed it and I don't have it, I can still rescind it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why it's in there, because, your seller's sitting on the fence there about signing it. And then you go, oh man, Jim just called and, they're rescinding the offer. I just signed it. Unfortunately, that's not the way the contract works, but it'd be a good education for your
Well,
seller.
and I advise people of that regardless of which sign, I'm like, you know, that even though we have this, someone could rescind this until you sign it and we've got a copy to
You're
them.
exactly right. It can be rescinded. We have that happen more often than what you think, where people make an offer. And then the sellers are kind of sitting on it, thinking about it. Another property comes on the market, they rescind that one. And all they gotta do is just an email, or even a phone call, but you'd want it in writing, I would think. On 21, we got all these riders. We already talked about them. You don't use a backup contract very often. But you do use a contingency for closing, the contingency for sale, and the government loan rider pretty often. Then on 385, I said, look, this contract really is horrible for new construction. You use this contract to establish the price on new construction. And then the builder typically has addendums or documents that you sign additionally that gives you all the materials, the roof, the exterior color, the exterior material, the flooring, all these things. So if they don't have that, if the builder doesn't have that, then you write in special agreements that buyer and builder will meet within X 7 days to sign documents agreeing on all materials for the home, for the new construction. And look at, you see what's next on 22? Oh, you can't see it on yours up here.
There you go.
Loaded
I love it.
contingency extended
Yes.
closing date. And then seller to pay sturdy real estate 2% commission for buyer's agent. On this contract, this is my,
I've got in trouble for that before.
we can, but this was actually my listing, my wife's listing. But anyhow, right, it's a house next door to us. And this lady, these people, the buyers, Adam Brown had called me and said, hey, we want to see this house. And I said, I can't. I was up on the north side of town or something, so I can't show it to you. And Lene, my partner, she was down in Branson. And I said, look, according to my phone, there's a Keller Williams agent in the house showing the house right now. You know, it showed the lockbox had just been popped. I said, when they walk out, just grab them and say, you know, Jim said to just have you represent us on this, you know, which would have been fine with me. Anyhow, the person was already gone or whatever. So they call this lady out of the blue. And she shows it to them, and of course they want to buy it. And we have to negotiate back and forth, but the contract's kind of messed up. And they send me a text and say, can we fire her and hire you? We're just not really happy. And I said, no, you cannot. Unfortunately, you know, she's representing you. Anyhow, so they write the contract. Well, she sends this over. I didn't volunteer this. She just sent it over. And I think they probably said, you know, you met us at the house and we're buying this house. But they basically put that in there. I didn't ask for it. I didn't say anything about it.
So the buyers negotiated for the buyer's agent to reduce her commission?
Yeah. Saved them $5,400. Didn't save the buyer anything, but it gave my seller $5,400, which knocked out these people named Weil, W-I-E-L or W-E-I-L. You know what they did? They filed a complaint with me, with the MREC, saying that I ripped them off by not selling them the house. I've been in it 28 years, maybe 30, and never had a complaint. So I sell the house next door for my 71-year-old neighbor who's moving to California. The buyer's agent reduces her commission, which basically $5,400 pays for a trip to California, right? Even if you drive and stay in nice hotels. I mean, she was excited as heck. She did. Plus, we'd had like 12 showings and she had to leave and she has nowhere to go, has no family. So she's going to McDonald's or the library. Anyhow, they filed a complaint, said, you know, I wasn't fair to them because they didn't get to buy the house. The guy then calls Mike Brown and tells him, and Mike said, I don't think your agent did a very good job. He said, because if you really wanted to buy it, what should you have done? And that's exactly what they put in the complaint, was they would have paid more should have paid more, right? And what's funny is their broker is the broker for Reese Nissel. But I'm the one that had to deal with the complaint. Their seller would, I mean, their agent was a broker.
Okay, but one time I negotiated my commission as a buyer's agent and I wrote in the special agreements, the commission, and the broker for Keller Williams and Branson threw a fit and got you involved, and you can't negotiate your compensation in a contract and all this hoopla, blah, blah, blah.
What's funny about that is it's really, is what the legal people have said all along, is, you know, it's two separate contracts. This is a contract with the seller, you know, a separate contract between the seller and that brokerage, and here you're coming in and trying to negotiate that. Now, guess what the legal eagles up there are telling us? You better write it in the contract. I mean, that's what the legal people at MAR are saying we should do, and that's what NAR is saying.
Once the settlement's in effect and MLS changes you're talking about.
Yeah, they're saying you know, you're probably gonna have to write it in the contract.
Well, I was flipping through here and I saw where the seller concessions will now be able to pay the buyer's agent commission, so.
And that's something, no, it's just such a strange change to me. That is something I'm gonna adjust. Well, I know I'm not gonna adjust. I'm not gonna do it. I'm gonna put 6%, and if they don't wanna list with me, I'll be okay with it. I'll just say, look, you know what? She'll list it for 4.
No, it won't.
I don't think I would either.
No.
Well, here's my greater point about this whole change is I think the idea of the jurors in Kansas City, if I can put myself in their head, was that, okay, well, what this is gonna do is it's gonna reduce the compensation that sellers are going to have to pay. And then so maybe the listing agent will help both parties now, and it'll cut the commission that the seller has to pay. Well, you know what that turns into? That turns into a buyer going to a used car lot, and that person has no vested interest at all other than slamming you in that car or slamming you in that house, you know, so that's not good for
They
buyers.
think too that it will cause prices. They think part of the reason the prices have risen so much is because of fees. That's not the case. Sellers dictate those, you know, dictate what the price is. We don't do that. If it's not the fees, yeah, we get paid really well, you know, if we sell enough and all of that, but it's not gonna cause the price of the houses to come down. They're not gonna reduce. I mean, we got a bunch of them right now. We're dealing with, not me, but agents in our company that are $1 million plus. If the seller thinks his house is worth $1 million plus, he's gonna list it for $1 million plus, whether he pays 6% or 3%. And we've got one that we've got under contract right now that's listed with Ernie, but it's one of our agents, got it 2.3 million. That guy's not gonna reduce his commission or his price by 60,000 because he's not paying commission on the other side. I mean, it's not gonna happen. It's just not gonna happen. Nobody's gonna reduce their price because they're not paying a commission to a buyer's agent.
They're just gonna be.
They're just gonna put more in their pocket, right? The seller's just gonna make more money. And that didn't accomplish anything. The legal eagles, you know, the only people that got made money on this are the attorneys. The buyer's agents or the buyers, all these people in the class action suit, they think they're going $17 or $18 a piece to maybe 200. And it's screwed up the whole world, I think. I don't know what's gonna happen. All right, on to that though. If you do have a personal interest, you're buying something for yourself or a family member, check the right box. These are easy. You're either a party to the transaction or you're helping your sister or your mom or your brother. Sources of broker's compensation. Notice that both boxes are checked because the seller is paying commission, only 2% to the buyer's agent, but she's also charging them a buyer's admin fee or whatever you want to call it. So she's getting paid. So she has checked both the boxes. And then in this case, the licensee assisting the seller, which was our company, was seller's limited agent and a designated agent. And then she worked with Sturdy, and I'm guessing they actually practice designated agency also. Okay? And there's my lovely wife, signed there right there, Christina Boland. She's the agent. I'm not an agent. I mean, I'm an agent. I just don't ever do anything. Go to the next page, and we are members of a franchise. It also says, if you look at line 44, under Missouri law, brokers are immune from liability for statements made by anybody unless This is line 44, unless we hire them, we pay them. If we employ them and then they make a statement that causes injury to the contract or the clients, then we are responsible. We never do that. Even if we call an inspector, we're not hiring them, we're engaging them. Same thing with an appraiser. We wouldn't hire them and pay them, we would just engage them. Same thing with a lender. So none of it comes off on us unless we make the mistake of actually paying that individual to do that job. 27, right now, we're sending all the information to the MLS so we can create market value. So we'll know what properties are worth because they were going crazy for a while. Now they've kind of stabilized a little bit. 28 and 29, that's not your job. Don't do anything. Don't try to figure out whether somebody's a terrorist or an alien or whatever they are. It is not your job. Because someone speaks differently, like me, it doesn't mean that I'm a terrorist or that I'm a redneck fascist or something like that. It just means that I'm different. So that's not your job. Your job is to sell houses regardless of anything and all the fair housing stuff. Okay, whatever that means. But you know, it could be reverse, right? I mean, if I went to Chicago or somewhere, they'd think I was, you know, a little crazy. So I'd have trouble getting buy a house, probably. That's not our job. Title company does all that. Don't do it. On acceptance of deadline, when am I going to expire this listing? Look, if you're in a heated deal, you're talking to the agent constantly, you just ask them, okay? Normally, if the people have to leave the house and I'm showing it in the morning, I'm giving them like 10 o'clock at night if we're writing an offer. I'm not going to give them till the next day because they got a sign in the yard. They had to leave for me to show it and my people want to buy it. So I'm going to write an offer. If I get the offer written by 1 or 2 o'clock, I'm sending it over and I want a quick turnaround on it. Now, if I talk to the agent, he says he's a firefighter and he works 48-hour shifts. We're not going to be able to get an answer that quick. Fine. I'll agree with that. And then if it's a foreclosure, never put an expiration date because they don't care. They don't care how long it lasts. If they want to answer, they will, and if they won't. But I think it's really, you need to have a good conversation with the other agent when you have this. That's it. We made all 8 pages. I'm glad for all the questions. It was nice to have people that are actually asking something or explaining something to what you think and what you think and what you think. I mean, that's a lot better than me doing it.
Are we gonna have a class or team meeting or something where you discuss what the changes are?
Yeah.
Probably once they're official, right?
It's probably gonna be 2 weeks. It'll probably be right around July, because July is when a lot of this is gonna happen. But, you know, this has only been out since when did I get it to you, Friday?
Yeah, last Thursday or Friday.
Thursday or Friday. So even we haven't had kind of time to review it or look at it and see what's happening. Now, we should have her teach it, she's actually read it, looked at it.
All right, Shannon, tell us all the changes.
No. I like to hear.
Well, some of the things, did you look through any of the documents?
I mean, I just flipped through them while I was sitting here.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's one, for example, there's more than one. The exclusive agency contract, you see how much red line's there, most of that's compensation issue. But then if you go back further to that next set of documents. Let's see, this is the next one. If I can ever get there. Cooperation agreement between brokers. You almost ought to fill that out with your name and everything, maybe not your signature, but everything, and then put it in your docs. Because you're gonna use that a lot. I mean, it's gonna be scary for a lot of people not showing property. And there'll be, a lot of people will get harmed by this, by not doing it. They won't get paid, or they'll get paid 1% or 0.5% or something. Have you ever done commercial transactions? You never know what you're getting, do you? unless you ask, you gotta ask. And then, and they just, they tell you what they're gonna pay you. And it's fine, because most of the time, like, ever since I've been doing it, well, when I was in Branson, it was 5%. We used to get 10% on commercial transactions, but up here, it's always been 3%. But they could tell you one, and you gotta accept it, because there's nothing, you don't have any documentation. There's no MLS, you can't look at anything. There's two of these documents, though. Let me see.
But when are you gonna suggest that we get this signed before we show the property or before
Oh, yeah.
the cooperation
Oh,
agreement?
yeah. Your first call, like I'm gonna show 2447 North
What am
Fremont.
I gonna get paid?
Yeah, you just call the agent, and say, hey, look, do you have a cooperating fee agreement on that? If they go, yeah, and say, how much is it? And they say 2%, then I think, okay, I'm gonna go back to my buyer and get 1% because I wanna get paid 3 at least. I mean, you know?
I know you don't know the answer to this, or maybe you do. If they agree that they're already like, yeah, I'm gonna do 2%, do you think we're still gonna have to do this with them? Like when we submit the offer?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just making sure. I don't-
Oh, this one.
The compensation rider?
Yeah, but you're gonna have something in writing, because the only way hey, look, we fought this battle as brokers a long time. Somebody tried to say, well, I reduced the commission. No, you didn't. It says it right there, 3%. You might have reduced it, but you didn't reduce it to me, who was showing the property. Now we don't have any way of knowing. Now, there's been discussions between various brokerages about perhaps we have,
A blanket agreement for the whole brokerage?
Keller Williams Springfield Cooperating Fee Agreement.com.
Oh, like a site?
Every listing we have has what the seller will pay for cooperating fee. And so then the other companies, we do about 5,000 transactions a year. And they do about 5,000 transactions a year. That's 10,000 of the.
10,000 phone calls. How much are you?
Yeah,
How
exactly.
much are you getting?
And documents being signed. That become a part of the contract, just added more layers to it. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about that, various companies and I have talked about perhaps we need that. Now, we couldn't have them together. We'd have to have a separate site. And then
No
it'd have to be updated. How do you do that?
I don't know. No pollutant though.
IDX agreement? No, because that fee can't be posted anywhere in the MLS.
Yeah, no MLS.
You see how much problem it's causing? It's just
I
ridiculous.
mean, you're gonna have to text an agent and say, hey, can I show this property? And by the way, what do you?
Which
What am I
property,
gonna-
but
what
you
am I
can do
gonna
it that way if you trusted them.
My guess would
That's
be
not a
just to
signed
attach
agreement.
this for whatever my percentage is on my contract and it mark it in the writer spot, yeah? Like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, mark in the writer spot and then boom, it's all part of the contract now.
Gotta remember this, it's a brokerage that's paying the fee, so it may have to have a broker's signature.
I bet you're looking forward to that.
Oh, I'm loving that
That
idea.
DocuSign, ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
Jim stamp.
One day I had my computer sound on, and I was sitting there with Renee, and she goes, what the hell is going on over there? And I said, I'm just signing agency documents and those kind of things. 40 or 50 or 60 today, you know? Thank you for coming.
You're welcome, that was fun.
No, I know, it wasn't really that much fun.
Sure it was.
We could have gone in depth. Oh, shoot, I'm gonna save these. Somebody's gonna want them.
Yeah, I just laid a whole bunch.